They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you trust most. But what happens when that betrayal doesn't just wound you? What happens when it transforms you into something far beyond human comprehension? Picture this: the most prestigious hunter academy in the world, where future legends are forged, where the strong rise and the weak are crushed beneath the weight of their own inadequacy. At the very top of this brutal hierarchy sits someone they call the Academy Emperor, a prodigy so powerful that even veteran hunters bow before his might. He's everything society worships: talented, ruthless, and utterly untouchable. And then there's him, the forgotten one, the mistake, the F-rank hunter who somehow managed to slip through the Academy's selection process. While others awakened with flashy SSS-Rank abilities and overwhelming power, he received nothing. No special skills, no unique talents. Just a body that could barely swing a sword and a mana core so pathetic it couldn't power a light bulb. For 3 years he endured. 3 years of humiliation. 3 years of being the Academy's punching bag, the comic relief, the living example of what happens when you don't have talent. The Emperor made sure of that. Every chance he got, he reminded him of his place. Not with words would have been too kind. No, the Emperor used his fists, his power, his overwhelming presence to grind him down day after day. But here's where things get interesting. Here's where the universe decided to play the cruelest joke imaginable. The Academy's annual expedition to the SSS-Rank dungeon known as the Abyss of Eternity. A place so dangerous that even S-rank hunters think twice before entering. A nightmare realm where reality itself seems to warp and twist. Where monsters that could level cities roam freely. Where treasures beyond imagination hide in the deepest shadows. The Academy brings their top students here every year. A test of courage and strength. A chance to prove yourself against the impossible. He wasn't supposed to be there. F-rank trash like him had no business stepping foot in an SSS-rank dungeon. But the Emperor had other plans. Call it sport. Call it entertainment. Call it the final humiliation. The Emperor personally selected him for the expedition, claiming it would be educational. The instructors knew what it meant. The students knew what it meant. He knew what it meant. They were going to get him killed. The expedition party consisted of the Academy's elite, 12 students, all A rank or higher, 5 instructors, each S-rank veterans with decades of experience, and him, the anomaly, the joke, the sacrifice they were all too happy to make if it meant securing better loot from the dungeon's depths. The Abyss of Eternity lived up to its name, twisting corridors that seemed to breathe, walls that pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and monsters, oh, the monsters. Creatures that defied description, beings that existed in multiple dimensions, at once, horrors that fed on fear itself. The expedition pushed deeper than anyone had gone before, driven by the Emperor's insatiable hunger for power and glory. And that's when it happened. Floor 77. A massive chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with ancient power. The Emperor sensed something significant ahead, something that called to his greedy heart. But the path forward was blocked by a monster unlike anything they'd encountered before. A chrono-devourer, a creature that existed outside normal time, its very presence causing reality to fragment and splinter. The battle was chaos. Even the instructors struggled against this thing. And in the midst of that chaos, the Emperor saw his opportunity. His chance to remove the embarrassment, to erase the stain on the Academy's reputation, to eliminate the weakling who somehow survived where he should have fallen. It happened so fast. A shove. A burst of the Emperor's overwhelming power. And suddenly he was flying backward, tumbling through a portal that the chrono-devourer had opened during the fight. A dimensional rift leading deeper into the dungeon, into areas that hadn't been explored in centuries, into depths where even the instructors feared to tread. His last sight before the portal closed was the Emperor's smile. Not a grin of triumph or the satisfaction of eliminating an enemy. No, it was something far crueler. It was the smile of someone disposing of trash they'd grown tired of carrying. The portal sealed behind him, with a sound like reality itself tearing. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. The kind of quiet that makes you painfully aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own existence ticking away second by second. He was alone. Completely alone. Injured from the fall, his pathetic F-rank body already screaming in agony from wounds that would have been minor scratches to any proper hunter. His supplies, gone, scattered during the tumble. His communication device, shattered into 1,000 useless pieces. His chances of survival, statistically 0. The chamber he'd landed in was massive beyond comprehension. So vast that he couldn't see the walls in any direction. The ceiling lost somewhere in the darkness above. The only light came from strange bioluminescent fungi growing in patches across the floor, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow that did more to create shadows than illuminate. And he could feel it. Even with his pathetic excuse for mana sensitivity, he could feel the power radiating from the very air around him. This wasn't just deep in the dungeon. This was something else entirely. This was a place where the dungeon's core energy flowed strongest, where the boundary between their reality and whatever lay beyond grew thin. Day 1. That's all he gave himself. One day to find a way out, to locate another portal, to somehow survive long enough to escape. He was an F-rank hunter. He had no business being here. He had no chance of surviving. Everyone knew it. The Emperor knew it. He knew it. But here's the thing about being rock bottom, about being the absolute lowest of the low, about having nothing left to lose. Sometimes it does something to you. Sometimes it breaks you. Sometimes it kills you. And sometimes it sets you free. Because when you've spent 3 years being told you're worthless, when you've endured countless beatings and humiliations, when you've been the universe's punching bag for so long that pain becomes just another Tuesday, what's one more impossibility to overcome? He had a choice. Give up and die in this forgotten corner of the abyss, or survive, not escape. No, that word implied hope, and hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. Just survive. One more day, then another after that. 999 days, that's how long he would spend in the depths of the abyss of eternity. 999 days of hell that would transform the Academy's greatest joke into something the Emperor never saw coming. 999 days that would change everything. Welcome to the story of the weakest hunter who became the strongest through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. Welcome to the tale of 999 days of grinding in an SSS-Rank dungeon. Welcome to the beginning of the Academy Emperor's worst nightmare. Let's begin. The first thing you need to understand about the Abyss of Eternity is that it wasn't designed for humans. Not in any meaningful way. Sure, dungeons appeared when the gates opened 20 years ago, transforming the world overnight. Hunters awakened with supernatural abilities, guilds formed to exploit the new resources, and humanity adapted to this dangerous new reality. But the Abyss was different. Most dungeons follow patterns, predictable monster spawns, logical floor progressions, treasures that correspond to the difficulty level. The Hunter Association has entire departments dedicated to cataloging these patterns, creating guides, establishing safety protocols. But SSS-Rank dungeons like the Abyss of Eternity? They laugh at human attempts to understand them. They exist according to rules we barely comprehend, operating on principles that make quantum physics look straightforward. Kai Chen, F-Rank hunter, and the Academy's favorite punching bag, learned this the hard way. His body screamed as consciousness returned. Not the sharp pain of broken bones or torn muscles, though he had plenty of those. No, this was different. This was the deep, throbbing agony of someone whose very existence was being rejected by the environment around them. The mana density here was suffocating, pressing down on his pathetic F-rank core like an ocean trying to force its way through a pinhole. He forced his eyes open. The bioluminescent fungi cast everything in that sickly blue-green light, creating shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. His hunter uniform, once crisp and bearing the Academy's proud insignia, was torn and bloodied. His left arm hung at an odd angle, probably fractured. His ribs felt like someone had used them for percussion practice. And his head. Oh, his head pounded with the worst headache he'd ever experienced. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. Kai tried to stand and immediately regretted it. The world spun, his vision blurring as nausea hit him like a physical force. He collapsed back down, gasping, trying to keep the meager contents of his stomach where they belonged. F-rank constitution. Even something as simple as standing was a challenge when your body was this broken. Status, he whispered, the word coming out as barely more than a croak. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. His hunter interface had always been practically blank, a mockery of the elaborate displays other hunters enjoyed. When you're F-rank, even the system seems to give up on you. He tried again, focusing his minimal mana into the mental command. This time, a translucent blue window flickered into existence before his eyes. And there it was, in all its pathetic glory. His name, Kai Chen. Rank F level 12. No title whatsoever. His attributes were equally pitiful. Strength sat at 11, agility at 13, vitality at 10, intelligence at 15, and his mana, the most important stat for any hunter, was a measly 8 points. For skills, he had only 2. Basic sword mastery at level 3, and mana sense at level 1. That was it. That was the sum total of 3 years at the most prestigious hunter academy in the world. Attributes barely above normal human levels. 2 skills that any hunter learned in their first week. No special abilities. No unique talents. Nothing that would help him survive even 5 minutes in this place. For comparison, the Academy Emperor, Jung Taiyang, had stats in the hundreds. His skill list scrolled for pages. His titles alone granted bonuses that exceeded Kai's entire attribute spread. And that was before accounting for his SSS-Rank unique ability, Celestial Domination, which let him nullify and absorb other hunters' powers. Kai dismissed the status window with a thought. No point dwelling on numbers that only reinforced how screwed he was. He needed to assess the situation, formulate a plan, do something productive with whatever time he had left. The chamber stretched out in all directions, its true size impossible to determine in the dim fungal light. The floor was smooth stone, almost glass-like, with veins of some crystalline substance running through it like frozen lightning. These veins pulsed with a faint internal light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in too many dimensions for human eyes to properly process. No monsters in sight. That was unexpected, and probably temporary. The dungeon's ecosystem was ruthless. Anything that fell into a new area became either predator or prey within hours. Given his current state, Kai knew which category he fell into. He needed shelter, water, food, medical supplies, all the things a proper hunter would carry in their spatial inventory. All the things he didn't have because F-rank hunters couldn't afford the mana cost of maintaining spatial storage. His supplies had been in a basic backpack, which was now scattered gods knew where across this massive chamber. Kai forced himself to take slow, steady breaths. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Fear was a distraction. He'd learned that the hard way during his 3 years at the academy, during every beating, every humiliation, every moment when stronger hunters used him as entertainment. The Emperor's face flashed through his mind. That smile. That damned smile as the portal closed. Jung Taiyang hadn't just abandoned him, hadn't just eliminated a weak link from the expedition. No, the Emperor had enjoyed it, had taken pleasure in the final disposal of the Academy's greatest embarrassment. Rage flickered in Kai's chest, hot and fierce, but he tamped it down. Anger was useless here. Revenge was a dream for people who survived, and his survival was anything but guaranteed. First things first, inventory. He needed to know what he had to work with. Patting himself down with his good arm sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but he gritted his teeth and continued. His hunter license was still in his breast pocket, for all the good it did him down here. A small knife on his belt, more tool than weapon. His broken communication device, completely useless. And yes, his emergency potion. One single F-rank healing potion that would maybe mend a few scrapes and take the edge off his pain. It wasn't much. It was pathetic, actually. But it was something. Kai uncorked the potion and downed it in one gulp. The liquid tasted like battery acid mixed with expired medicine, but within seconds, warmth spread through his body. His fractured arm straightened with an audible crack that made him see stars. His ribs stopped screaming quite so loudly. The worst of his cuts and bruises faded to dull aches. The potion couldn't fix everything. F-rank potions weren't miracles, but it bought him mobility, and mobility meant options. He stood again, this time successfully. The world still spun slightly, but he could manage. He was an F-rank hunter who'd spent 3 years getting beaten down by everyone stronger than him. Managing pain was practically his superpower. Now for the hard part. Finding out just how deep in the dungeon he actually was. Kai activated his mana sense skill, one of the 2 pitiful abilities he possessed. It was basic, barely functional, the kind of skill that proper hunters developed passively without even trying. But it was all he had. The world exploded into sensation. Mana, so much mana it was like standing at the bottom of the ocean. Currents and eddies of power swirling through the air, through the ground, through everything. Colors he didn't have names, for energies that his F-rank senses couldn't properly interpret. It was overwhelming, suffocating, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. And in the distance, something massive. Something ancient. A presence so vast that it made his mana sense feel like trying to comprehend the sun by staring directly at it. Kai cut off the skill immediately, gasping. His nose was bleeding. Just using mana sense in this environment was enough to cause damage. The mana density here was absurd, orders of magnitude beyond anything he'd ever experienced, which meant he was deep. Probably deeper than the expedition had intended to go. Possibly deeper than anyone had ever been. The Academy Emperor had thrown him into the absolute depths of the abyss of eternity. A place where even S-rank hunters would struggle. A place where an F-rank like him had no business existing. Kai wiped the blood from his nose and allowed himself a bitter laugh. Of course. Of course the universe's final joke would be this. He'd survived 3 years of hell at the Academy only to end up somewhere infinitely worse. But here's the thing about rock bottom that most people don't understand. When you're already at the lowest point imaginable, when you've got nothing left to lose, when the universe has already done its absolute worst to you, that's when you're most free. Because what could the abyss possibly do to him that was worse than 3 years under the Emperor's boot? Kill him? He was already supposed to be dead. Break him? He'd been broken and rebuilt so many times he'd lost count. Take everything from him? He had nothing in the first place. The Emperor made a mistake. He'd meant to dispose of trash, to eliminate an embarrassment, to erase a stain on the Academy's reputation. But what he'd actually done was set Kai free. Free from expectations. Free from hope. Free from the crushing weight of trying to live up to standards he could never reach. Down here in the depths of the abyss, there were no ranks, no hierarchies, no academy to judge him. just survival in its purest, most brutal form. Kai looked around the chamber with fresh eyes, not as a scared F-rank hunter wondering how to escape, but as someone who'd just been handed a prison sentence. 999 days. That's what it would take. Not to escape, he was too deep for that. But to survive. To endure. To transform. The fungi glowed brighter suddenly, responding to something. Kai tensed, his pathetic mana stirring as much as his broken body would allow. Movement in the shadows, multiple somethings approaching from different directions. Of course the dungeon wouldn't let him rest. Of course his first trial would begin immediately, because that's just how his life worked. 3 creatures emerged from the darkness. Crystalline spiders the size of large dogs, their bodies composed of the same strange material that veined the floor. 8 legs that clicked against stone with sounds like breaking glass. Mandibles that could probably punch through steel. And eyes, too many eyes, all fixated on him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. F-rank hunter versus 3 dungeon monsters. In a fair world, this would be a massacre. Kai would die here and now, his story ending before it truly began. But Kai had learned something important during his 3 years of being the Academy's punching bag. Something the Emperor and all the other talented hunters never had to understand. When you're weak, you don't fight fair. You don't face challenges head-on. You survive by any means necessary. Honor and dignity be damned. The spiders advanced, their movements synchronized like they shared a hive mind. Kai's hand went to the small knife at his belt. Pathetic weapon for a pathetic hunter. But it was sharp, and he knew how to use it. He didn't run. Running would just tire him out, and there was nowhere to go anyway. Instead, he moved toward the nearest cluster of fungi, positioning himself carefully. The spiders followed, spreading out to surround him. Classic predator tactics. Kai waited until they were close enough, until he could see his reflection in their crystalline bodies. Then he struck. Not at the spiders, at the fungi. His knife pierced the largest growth, and the reaction was immediate. The fungus burst, releasing a cloud of spores that filled the air with that eerie blue-green light. The spiders recoiled, their movements suddenly erratic. The spores were affecting them, disrupting whatever senses they used to hunt. Kai didn't hesitate. While they were confused, he lunged at the nearest spider, knife aimed not at its crystalline shell, but at the joints between its legs. Weak points. Every creature had them, no matter how tough its exterior. The blade sank home, and the spider shrieked. Actually shrieked, a sound like shattering glass that made Kai's ears ring. But his knife had done its job, severing the leg at the joint. The spider stumbled, its precise movements thrown off by the sudden imbalance. The other 2 spiders recovered from the spores, converging on Kai with renewed aggression. He dove aside, his F-rank agility barely enough to avoid the snapping mandibles. His injured body protested every movement. But pain was just another piece of data to be processed and ignored. This was survival, not glorious, not heroic, just desperate and brutal and visceral. Everything proper hunters never had to experience, cushioned as they were by overwhelming power and superior equipment. Kai couldn't overpower these creatures, couldn't outspeed them, couldn't outlast them in a direct confrontation. But he could be clever. He could be ruthless. He could exploit every tiny advantage the environment offered. Another fungus burst, another cloud of spores. The spider's coordination broke down as the spores interfered with their senses. Kai struck again, this time at a different joint, crippling another leg. The wounded spider toppled, its remaining legs unable to maintain balance. 2 spiders still functional. Kai's breath came in ragged gasps, his stamina already depleting. F-rank vitality meant he tired quickly, his body unable to sustain prolonged combat. He needed to end this fast. The 3rd spider lunged, mandibles spread wide. Kai didn't try to dodge completely. Instead, he twisted, letting the mandibles graze his side while bringing his knife up in a desperate thrust. The blade found the spider's eyes, multiple lenses shattering under the impact. The spider convulsed, thrashing wildly. One of its flailing legs caught Kai across the chest, sending him flying backward. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. His knife clattered away into the darkness. Unarmed, injured, barely able to breathe, and two spiders still coming for him. This was it. This was how the story ended. Kai Chen, F-rank failure, killed by dungeon trash in the first hour of his imprisonment. The Emperor would never even know. Would never care. The Academy would forget he existed within a week. But as Kai lay there, struggling to breathe, staring up at the approaching spiders, something inside him shifted. A thought so simple it was almost stupid. A realization so obvious he should have had it years ago. He was already dead. The moment the Emperor threw him through that portal, his fate was sealed. F-rank hunters don't survive the depths of SSS-Rank dungeons. It's simply not possible. The universe had already written his obituary, which meant he had nothing left to prove, nothing left to lose, no expectations to live up to, no standards to meet, no judgments to fear. For the first time in 3 years, Kai Chen was completely, utterly free. The spiders were almost on him. Kai's hand brushed against something on the ground. Not his knife. Something else. One of the crystalline veins that ran through the floor, pulsing with that strange internal light. Without thinking, purely on instinct, Kai grabbed it, and the world exploded. Pain. That's all there was at first. Pure, unfiltered agony that made every previous injury feel like a gentle massage. The crystalline vein, that seemingly innocuous line of light in the floor, had responded to his touch in ways Kai's F-rank mind couldn't comprehend. Energy poured into him. Not the refined, controlled mana that hunters carefully cultivated. No, this was raw dungeon essence, the fundamental power that gave birth to monsters and warped reality itself. It flooded through his pathetic mana channels like molten lava through paper straws, burning, tearing, destroying everything it touched. Kai screamed. The sound echoed through the massive chamber, bouncing off walls he couldn't see, creating a symphony of his own agony. His body convulsed, back arching until he thought his spine might snap. The veins in his arms turned black, visible through his skin as the dungeon essence raced through his circulatory system. The spiders, intelligent enough to recognize danger when they saw it, scattered. Whatever was happening to the human prey, it wasn't natural, wasn't safe. They retreated into the shadows, leaving Kai alone with his transformation. Because that's what it was. Transformation. The dungeon essence was rewriting him at a fundamental level, reshaping his mana channels, restructuring his very existence. An F-rank body wasn't designed to handle this kind of power. It should have killed him instantly. Should have ripped him apart from the inside out. But Kai had something going for him that proper hunters, those blessed with talent and strength, could never understand. He was used to pain, had intimate knowledge of suffering. 3 years of beatings, humiliations, injuries that would have broken a normal person, they'd forged something in him. Not strength, not talent, but endurance. The stubborn, ridiculous endurance of someone who refused to stay down no matter how many times the universe kicked him. So instead of dying, instead of shattering under the onslaught of raw power, Kai endured. He screamed and thrashed and bled from every orifice, but he endured. His consciousness fragmented, splintering into 1,000 pieces. But the core of who he was, that held. How long it lasted, he couldn't say. Time lost meaning when every second felt like an eternity of agony. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Could have been days. But eventually, impossibly, it ended. Kai lay on the chamber floor, steam rising from his body, The crystalline vein he'd grabbed had gone dark, its internal light completely drained. His hunter uniform was nothing but charred tatters. His skin was covered in strange, web-like patterns, dark lines that followed where the dungeon essence had burned through his mana channels. He took a breath. Then another. His lungs worked. His heart beat. He was alive. Kai forced himself to sit up, his movements shaky. His body felt different. Foreign, almost, like wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right. He raised his hands, flexing his fingers, watching the dark patterns shift across his skin. "Status," he whispered. The interface appeared, and Kai's eyes widened. His rank still showed F, but there was an error message next to it saying recalculation required. He was still level 12, but everything else had changed dramatically. His strength had jumped to 28, an increase of 17 points. Agility was now 31, up by 18. Vitality sat at 27, a gain of 17. Intelligence had climbed to 22, up by 7. But his mana had skyrocketed to 89, an increase of 81 points. The numbers swam before his eyes. Nearly triple his previous attributes across the board. His mana stat had increased by a factor of 10, and his skills had changed too. Basic sword mastery was still level 3, but mana sense had jumped to level 4 and showed a notation that it had evolved. Plus, he had 2 completely new skills he'd never heard of. Essence Absorption, at level 1, and something called Dungeon Adaptation that was marked as passive, which meant it was always active, always working. What had he done? What had that crystalline vein done to him? Kai dismissed the status window and looked around the chamber with fresh eyes. His mana sense, now level 4 and evolved according to the system, painted the world in layers of information he'd never perceived before. The mana currents weren't just random flows, they were patterns, ecosystems. The dungeon was alive in ways he'd never imagined, a vast organism with the monsters as cells and the mana as lifeblood. And those crystalline veins, they were arteries, conduits carrying pure dungeon essence from some central source deeper in the abyss. Touching one had nearly killed him, but it had also fundamentally changed him, given him strength he never should have possessed. A new skill description appeared in his vision, unbidden. Essence Absorption. The description read that it allowed direct absorption of dungeon essence and monster cores. But there was a warning. Absorption carried risk of essence corruption. His current corruption level was at 3%. 3% corruption. Kai didn't know what that meant, but the warning was clear enough. Whatever he'd done, there were consequences. A price to be paid for power that wasn't rightfully his. But what choice did he have? He was trapped here. The expedition wouldn't come looking for him. The academy probably marked him dead the moment the portal closed. He could either lie down and accept that fate, or he could struggle, fight, adapt, survive. Kai stood, his new strength making the movement smooth despite his injuries. The burns and tears in his muscles were still there, but his enhanced vitality meant they'd heal faster. He could already feel his body working to repair the damage. The chamber stretched out before him, vast and filled with dangers he couldn't see, but also opportunities. If one crystalline vein could do this to him, what else was down here? What other secrets did the abyss hide in its depths? Day 1 ended with Kai finding shelter in a small alcove, just large enough for him to wedge himself into defensively. No food yet, no water. But he was alive, and that was more than anyone expected. Day 2 began with screaming pain as his enhanced attributes settled into his body. Growing pains, but worse. His muscles literally tearing and reforming stronger. His bones aching as they densified. His mana channels burning as they expanded to accommodate his new capacity. This was the price of his transformation. The dungeon essence had remade him, but the process wasn't instant. His body needed time to adapt, to accept the changes that had been forced upon it. Kai spent day 2 in his alcove, trembling and sweating, fighting to maintain consciousness as his body rewrote itself. His new passive skill, dungeon adaptation, was working overtime. He could feel it. His cells learning to exist in this high-mana environment, his very biology shifting to treat the abyss as home rather than hostile territory. It was terrifying. It was excruciating. But most importantly, it was working. By day 3, Kai could move again. The transformation pains had subsided to a dull ache, manageable if not comfortable. His first priority was water. A human could survive weeks without food, but only days without water. And despite his enhanced attributes, he was still fundamentally human. His evolved mana sense led him to a condensation point where mana crystallized out of the air. The water that collected was thick with dissolved minerals and mana, tasting like drinking lightning. But it was water. Kai filled his stomach and immediately regretted it, as the high mana content made him violently ill. Dungeon adaptation kicked in again, his body learning, adjusting, becoming capable of processing what would kill a normal hunter. By day 4, he could drink the mana-saturated water without issue. Food was a bigger problem. The bioluminescent fungi might be edible, but they might also be lethally poisonous. The dungeon monsters were theoretically protein, but hunting them with his current injuries was risky. Kai needed to become stronger first. Needed to test the limits of his new abilities. Day 5, he found another crystalline vein. This one was smaller, less potent than the first. Kai hesitated, remembering the agony of his initial absorption. 3% corruption. The system had warned him. Each absorption carried risk. But he was already changed, already tainted by dungeon essence. What was a little more corruption in exchange for the strength to survive? Kai touched the vein. The pain was less this time. Still excruciating, still pushing him to the edge of consciousness, but bearable. His essence absorption skill was level 1. Level 1 meant crude, inefficient, wasteful. But it was functional. When the absorption finished, Kai checked his status. His strength had increased to 35, a gain of 7 points. His mana had jumped to 112, up by 23. But his corruption had climbed to 7%, an increase of 4%. Diminishing returns and accelerating corruption. The first vein had been a massive boost because it caught him completely unpowered. Now he was enhanced. The relative gain was smaller. But the corruption was growing. Kai needed to be smart about this, couldn't just absorb everything in sight or he'd lose himself to the corruption entirely. But measured doses, strategic absorption, that could work. The rest of the first week passed in a blur of cautious exploration and careful experimentation. Kai mapped the massive chamber, learning its rhythms, understanding its ecosystem. The crystalline spiders weren't the only monsters. There were shadow things that existed partially in another dimension. Bone constructs that patrolled specific routes with mechanical precision. Manhwa, elementals that formed from concentrations of dungeon essence. Living spells that attacked anything not native to the abyss. An F-rank hunter would have died to any of these monsters within seconds. But Kai was no longer F-rank, even if the system hadn't updated his official designation yet. His enhanced attributes put him somewhere around E-rank, maybe low D-rank. Still pathetic by proper hunter standards, but functional. Capable of surviving if he was smart and careful. Day 10 marked his first successful hunt. A lone crystalline spider separated from its pack. Kai stalked it for hours, learning its patterns, identifying its weaknesses. When he finally struck, it was with precision born of desperate need rather than skill. His makeshift spear, fashioned from a sharp piece of crystalline debris, punched through the joint between the spider's head and thorax. The monster died with that characteristic shattering glass shriek. And from its corpse, something new emerged. A monster core, a small sphere of condensed mana and dungeon essence that all dungeon creatures formed naturally. Kael held the core, feeling its power pulse against his palm. His essence absorption skill activated automatically, the core dissolving as its energy flowed into him. His skin hardened, just slightly, taking on some of the crystalline spider's defensive properties. Not much, just a hint. But it was something. A permanent enhancement from absorbing the monster's essence. The system notified him that he'd absorbed a low-grade crystalline spider core. His corruption increased by 1%. His mana went up by 8 points. And he'd discovered a new trait called crystal reinforcement. This was it. This was how he would survive. Not through traditional training or equipment, or proper hunting techniques. Through absorption. Through taking the dungeon's own power and making it his own. Corruption be damned. By day 20, Kael had killed and absorbed 15 more monsters. His corruption sat at 23%, and he could feel it. His thoughts sometimes came with an alien edge. His instincts occasionally led him toward behaviors that weren't quite human. When he looked at his reflection in a pool of mana water, his eyes sometimes seemed to catch the light wrong, reflecting colors that didn't exist. But his power had grown. Level 18 now. Attributes pushing into solid D-rank territory. His essence absorption skill had reached level 3, making each absorption more efficient and less agonizing. Day 30 was when he found the first trial. The chamber had other passages leading deeper into the abyss, but Kael had avoided them. Going deeper seemed suicidal when he was still struggling to survive here. But on day 30, he discovered something different. A massive door carved from pure mana crystal, covered in runes that hurt to look at directly. Above the door, written in letters that blazed with power, "Trial of adaptation. Only the changed may enter. Only the changed." Kael looked down at his corruption-marked skin, at the dark patterns that covered his arms and chest. He was certainly changed. But was he ready? The door responded to his approach, recognizing something in his essence-altered being. It opened silently, revealing a corridor beyond. A corridor that promised both danger and reward in equal measure. Kael hesitated. 23% corruption. That meant he was nearly a quarter of the way to what? Complete transformation, loss of humanity, becoming a dungeon monster himself? But what good was humanity in a place like this? What use was holding on to his old self when that self was weak and pathetic and destined to die? The Emperor had thrown him away. The Academy had already forgotten him. He owed them nothing. Owed the world nothing. All he owed was himself. The promise to survive. To endure. To prove that even an F rank could become something more. Kael stepped through the doorway. The trial chamber was smaller than the main area. Circular, with walls of dark crystal that seemed to absorb light. In the center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a perfect sphere of concentrated dungeon essence, larger than any core he'd absorbed, more potent than any crystalline vein he'd found. A voice echoed through the chamber, neither male nor female, neither human nor monster. Consume the essence, complete your transformation, or reject it and remain weak. Choose. Kael approached the pedestal. His essence absorption skill was practically vibrating with eagerness, recognizing the power on offer. But his rational mind, the part of him still human, screamed warnings. This was too much, too concentrated. It would accelerate his corruption dramatically, might push him past some critical threshold where he could never go back. But when had going back ever been an option? When had normal life been waiting for him? The Academy wouldn't take him back. The Emperor wanted him dead. His old life was gone the moment that portal closed. Kael reached out and touched the sphere. Power flooded into him. Not the painful surge of the crystalline veins. Not the measured absorption of monster cores. This was something else entirely. This was the abyss itself choosing him, accepting him, remaking him in its image. His body convulsed, but this time he didn't scream, didn't fight it. He embraced the transformation, welcomed it, let it wash away the last vestiges of the weak F-rank hunter he used to be. When it ended, Kai stood transformed. His hunter status had changed dramatically. His rank now showed D instead of F. His level had jumped from 12 all the way to 25. His strength was now 89. Agility had reached 92. Vitality sat at 86. Intelligence was 67. And his mana had climbed to 245. His skill list had evolved significantly. Basic sword mastery had evolved into something called adaptive combat at level 1. Mana sense had become essence vision, also at level 1. Essence absorption was now level 5. Dungeon adaptation showed as passive at max level. He'd gained a new passive skill called Abyss Walker, and another new skill, corruption resistance at level 3. His corruption level had jumped to 47%. 47%, nearly half. He could feel it now, the dungeon's influence woven through every fiber of his being. But he could also feel the new skill, corruption resistance, his body learning to manage the transformation, to prevent complete loss of self even as it embraced inhuman power. Kai looked down at his hands. The dark patterns had spread, covering most of his visible skin. His fingers ended in claws that could retract at will. His senses extended far beyond human normal, picking up mana signatures, sensing vibrations, detecting prey and predators across vast distances. He was no longer the person who'd been thrown through that portal. That weak, pathetic F-rank hunter was gone. Dead. Consumed by the transformation. What stood in his place was something new. Something changed. Something that the abyss of eternity had chosen to forge from the raw material of human weakness and desperate determination. Day 31, Kai emerged from the trial chamber. The monsters in the main chamber sensed the change in him. The crystalline spiders that once hunted him now kept their distance. The shadow things avoided his path. He was no longer prey. Days 32 through 50 were spent establishing territory. Kai claimed a section of the chamber, marking it with his essence in ways that the dungeon's native creatures understood. They learned quickly. The changed one was not to be trifled with. Food was no longer an issue. Kai could absorb essence directly from defeated monsters, sustaining himself on pure mana when physical nutrition wasn't available. The mana water that once made him sick now restored his energy faster than any potion. Days 51 through 75 were dedicated to training. His new skills needed development. Adaptive combat was fascinating, allowing him to learn and counter fighting styles mid-battle. Essence vision showed him the world in layers of power and weakness, revealing optimal strike points, mana flow patterns, everything he needed to fight efficiently. Abyss Walker let him move through the dungeon as if it were his natural habitat. Passages that would confuse other hunters made perfect sense to him. He could navigate by sensing the flow of dungeon essence, following the currents like a fish in water. By day 76, Kai had mapped not just the main chamber, but 3 additional areas connected to it. Each one had its own ecosystem, its own monsters, its own crystalline veins to absorb. His corruption crept up slowly, but corruption resistance kept pace, preventing runaway transformation while still allowing him to grow stronger. Days 77 through 90 were spent hunting. Not for survival anymore, but for power. For growth. Kai developed techniques that no proper hunter would ever use. Combat styles built around essence absorption and corruption-enhanced abilities. He learned to trigger partial transformations, temporarily pushing his corruption higher to gain bursts of strength, before letting corruption resistance pull him back. Day 91, he found another trial. Trial of predation, only the hunter may enter. He passed it, emerged stronger. Level 32, attributes pushing into C-rank territory. new skills that enhanced his hunting capabilities, made him more efficient at tracking, killing, absorbing. Days 92 through 100 were different. Kael spent them in contemplation, reviewing everything he'd learned, everything he'd become. The person who entered the abyss 100 days ago was gone, completely consumed by transformation and necessity. In his place was what? Still human, technically. His corruption resistance ensured he retained human cognition, human emotions, human values. But his body, his power, his very existence had been fundamentally altered. On day 100, Kael stood at the edge of his territory, looking deeper into the abyss. He'd survived the impossible, grown from F rank to mid-C rank in just over 3 months, developed abilities that regular hunters couldn't comprehend. But he was only just beginning. The Emperor had thrown him into this hell intending for him to die. Instead, Kael had found something the privileged prodigy could never understand. Purpose. Drive. The raw, desperate hunger to prove that weakness wasn't destiny. 900 more days stretched before him. 900 more days to grow stronger, to learn, to transform, to prepare for the day when he would return to the surface and show Jung Taiyang exactly what his discarded trash had become. The abyss of eternity had broken him, remade him, blessed him with power purchased in pain and corruption, and this was only the beginning. The second 100 days marked a fundamental shift in Kael's approach to survival. He'd stopped running, stopped hiding. The abyss was no longer a prison but a training ground, and every monster, every challenge, every drop of essence was fuel for his transformation. Day 105, Kael discovered that the different monster types granted different benefits when absorbed. The crystalline spiders gave defensive traits and enhanced durability. The shadow things improved his stealth and dimensional awareness. The bone constructs strengthened his skeletal structure and physical resilience. He began hunting strategically, balancing his absorptions to create a well-rounded enhancement, rather than specializing too heavily in any one area. His corruption climbed to 51% by day 110, but corruption resistance kept him stable, kept him human where it mattered. That's when he met his first intelligent dungeon dweller. The Keeper, as it introduced itself, wasn't quite a monster, and wasn't quite a human. It had been a hunter once, long ago, who'd descended too deep into the abyss and chosen transformation over death. Now it served the dungeon, maintaining certain areas, guiding those few who survived long enough to be worth guiding. Interesting, the Keeper said, its voice like grinding stones. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a fusion of human features and crystalline growths. Usually the changed ones lose themselves around 60%. But you resist. Why? Kael, now comfortable enough in his power to hold conversation rather than fight everything on sight, considered the question. Because I have something to prove, someone to show. The world wrote me off as worthless F-rank trash. I'll prove them wrong, even if it kills me. The Keeper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Pride, the most human of motivations. The dungeon likes that, likes fighters, likes those who refuse to give in. It gestured toward a passage Kael hadn't explored yet. 3 levels down, there's a nest of void serpents. Extremely dangerous, extremely rewarding. You're not ready yet, but soon. How soon? When your adaptive combat reaches level 5 and you understand how to manipulate essence externally, not just absorb it, then you'll be ready. The Keeper vanished into a wall of crystal, leaving Kael with a goal. External essence manipulation. None of his current skills did that. He absorbed power, used it internally, but couldn't project it outward like proper hunters with their mana techniques. Days 111 through 130 were spent experimenting. Kael tried to channel his corrupted mana into attacks, into barriers, into anything that would work outside his body. He failed repeatedly. His essence was too heavily corrupted by the dungeon, too changed from normal mana to function in traditional ways. But then, on day 131, he had a realization. He was trying to use corrupted essence like pure mana, forcing it to follow rules it wasn't designed for. What if he worked with the corruption instead of against it? Kai stood before a boulder in one of the side chambers. He gathered his essence, not trying to purify it or control it with typical techniques. Instead, he let it be what it was. Raw, chaotic, hungry dungeon power. Then he pushed it outward, not as a shaped spell but as a controlled release. The essence hit the boulder and consumed it. Not destroyed it. Consumed it. Breaking it down into mana and matter, absorbing its structure, feeding the power back into Kai. A new skill notification appeared. He'd unlocked something called Essence Projection at level 1. The description explained that it allowed him to project corrupted essence to consume, corrode, or transform targets. It could be developed into various specialized techniques. External manipulation. Not through traditional spells, but through his unique corrupted nature. Kai practiced obsessively for the next 20 days, learning to control the projection, to vary its intensity, to use it for purposes beyond simple destruction. By day 150, he could create temporary essence constructs, weapons made from solidified corruption that dissolved after use, barriers that consumed incoming attacks rather than blocking them, traps that waited for prey before activating. His adaptive combat reached level 5 on day 153 after he deliberately sought out and fought every different monster type he could find. The skill evolved again. Adaptive combat at level 5 transformed into combat mastery. Abyss style at level 1. It was described as a unique combat system developed through corrupted essence and dungeon adaptation. It incorporated elements from all the monster types he'd absorbed. The Keeper appeared again on day 154, observed Kai's new techniques, and nodded approvingly. You're ready for the Void Serpents, but know this. They're not ordinary monsters. They're dungeon-born elites, creatures that have evolved through countless cycles. Losing to them doesn't mean death. It means becoming their prey, sustaining them, feeding their growth. I won't lose, Kai said simply. Famous last words, but I like your confidence. Level 3. Follow the black veins in the floor. They'll lead you to the nest. The descent to level 3 took 2 days of careful navigation through passages that shifted and changed. The dungeon's geography rearranging itself according to rules Kai was still learning to understand. His Abyss Walker passive helped immensely, giving him instinctual knowledge of safe paths and dangerous routes. Level 3 was different from the upper areas. The air itself seemed thicker, more oppressive. The mana density was suffocating even with all his adaptations. The light from bioluminescent fungi was dimmer, creating pools of absolute darkness between patches of sickly illumination. And the monsters, they were stronger, faster, more aggressive. These weren't the manageable creatures of level 1. These were predators that had survived in the deep abyss for years, decades, perhaps centuries. Kai found the Void Serpent Nest on day 157, a massive cavern where reality seemed to fray at the edges, where looking too long at the walls made his eyes hurt and his mind ache. 7 serpents coiled in the center, each one 20 feet of muscle and scale and teeth, their bodies partially phased out of normal space. They sensed him immediately. 7 pairs of eyes focused on the intruder. 7 mouths opened, revealing teeth that existed in multiple dimensions at once. 7 hisses that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his skull. Kai didn't hesitate. Hesitation was death. He activated combat mastery, Abyss style, and charged. The battle was chaos. The Void Serpents could phase partially out of reality, making them difficult to hit with normal attacks. But Kai's corrupted essence wasn't normal. His essence projection could touch them even when they were partially phased, could consume their partially real forms just as easily as solid matter. Still, 7-on-1 was overwhelming. The serpents were coordinated, working together with an intelligence that suggested hive mind or pack tactics. They struck from multiple angles, used the environment to their advantage, forced Kai into defensive positions. He took hits, bad ones. A serpent's fangs sank into his shoulder, injecting venom that would have killed a normal hunter instantly. But Kai's dungeon adaptation and corruption resistance processed the venom, broke it down, turned it into essence he could absorb. One serpent fell, then another. Kai's combat mastery adapted to their patterns, learned their tells, found openings in their coordinated assault. His essence attacks consumed them when they died, adding their power to his own mid-battle. By the time the seventh serpent fell, Kai was standing in a pool of his own blood, his body covered in wounds that were already healing, thanks to his enhanced vitality. But he'd won. Against 7 elite monsters of the deep abyss, an F-rank hunter who'd been thrown away as trash had won. The notifications came flooding in. He'd absorbed multiple void serpent cores. His level jumped from 35 all the way to 39. He gained new traits. Void Step would let him phase partially out of reality for short periods. Dimensional awareness allowed him to sense distortions in space. His corruption increased from 51% to 58%. His skills also leveled up significantly. Essence absorption went from level 5 to level 7. Essence projection jumped from level 1 to level 3. Combat mastery. Abyss style increased from level 1 to level 2, and corruption resistance climbed from level 3 to level 5. Kai collapsed, not from exhaustion but from the overwhelming influx of power. The void serpents had been potent, their essence concentrated and refined through centuries of evolution. Absorbing all 7 at once pushed his transformation further than any single event since the trial chamber. When he finally stood again, Kai could feel the changes. His corruption had jumped 7%, but more importantly, he'd gained abilities that no normal hunter possessed. Void Step let him phase like the serpents had, becoming briefly intangible. Dimensional awareness showed him weak points in space, places where reality was thin. The Keeper found him 3 hours later, still standing in the nest, processing the transformation. Impressive. Most don't survive their first encounter with void serpents. You killed all 7. The dungeon is pleased. The dungeon is pleased? Kai asked. It's alive. In ways that matter, yes. The abyss isn't just a location, it's an entity, ancient, vast, incomprehensible. It tests those who enter, breaking the weak and forging the strong. You've passed another test. How many tests are there? The Keeper's crystalline features arranged themselves into something approximating a smile. Until you either die, leave, or become something beyond human entirely. The abyss has no final test, only escalating challenges. Days 158 through 170 were recovery. The void serpent battle had pushed Kai hard, and even with his enhanced healing, he needed time to fully integrate the new powers. He spent the time practicing Void Step, learning to phase in and out of reality without losing his bearings or getting stuck between dimensions. Day 171, he returned to level 2, finding it almost easy after the trials of level 3. The monsters there, which had once been genuine threats, now fell quickly to his enhanced abilities. He wasn't hunting for survival anymore. He was hunting for specific traits, targeting monsters that could fill gaps in his skill set. By day 200, Kai had reached level 42. His attributes were solidly in the B rank range, approaching A rank in some areas. His corruption sat at 63%, a number that would have horrified him months ago, but now felt manageable, stable, controlled by his maxed corruption resistance. The Keeper visited again, this time bringing news. There's a passage to level 5, deep in the southeast quadrant of level 3. No one's been that deep in my memory, and I've been here for 7 decades. The monsters there, they're not like anything you've faced. When will I be ready? When you evolve your essence manipulation beyond simple projection. When you can shape it, control it. Make it into tools and techniques as versatile as any mage's spell list. Right now, you're a brute with enhanced strength. You need to become an artist. Days 201 through 250 were dedicated to that goal. Kai stopped hunting except when necessary, and instead focused on essence manipulation. He studied the dungeon itself, watching how it used mana and corruption to create constructs, to reshape reality, to sustain its ecosystem. He learned to create essence barriers that could block physical and magical attacks. Learned to fashion essence blades that could cut through anything. Learned to lay essence traps that would activate on specific triggers. Learned to create temporary essence armor that enhanced his already formidable defense. By day 260, his essence projection had evolved into something new. The skill transformed from essence projection at level 7 into essence manipulation at level 1. This gave him complete control over corrupted essence. He could create, shape, and control essence constructs with precision. The system noted that his current corruption level increased the maximum complexity of what he could create. Days 260 through 300 pushed his new mastery to its limits. Kai created increasingly complex constructs, essence chains to bind opponents, essence clones to fight alongside him, essence bombs that detonated with devastating effect, essence shields that not only blocked attacks but absorbed them, converting enemy power into fuel for his own techniques. His combat style evolved from the brutal efficiency of earlier months into something approaching artistry. He wasn't just stronger than the monsters he fought. He was smarter, more creative, more adaptable. Every battle became an experiment, a test of new applications for his corrupted power. The Keeper watched one of these battles on day 295, observing as Kai dismantled a pack of shadow stalkers using techniques that no traditional hunter would recognize or understand. When the fight ended, the Keeper spoke a single word: ready. Day 300 marked a milestone. Kai stood at the entrance to level 5, his corruption at 67%, his level at 48, his power approaching low A rank in overall capability. He'd spent 200 days transforming from a survivor into a predator, from prey into hunter, from victim into something the abyss itself acknowledged. Jung Taoyang's smiling face flashed through his mind. The Academy Emperor who'd thrown him away, who'd disposed of him like trash, who'd never imagined that his cruel joke would birth something like this. 700 days remained. 700 more days to grow, to evolve, to prepare. The Emperor thought he'd eliminated a problem. Instead, he'd created his own worst nightmare. And that nightmare was just getting started. The journey from day 300 to day 600 was a period of relentless growth and discovery. Kai had mastered the fundamentals of survival and transformation. Now came refinement, perfection, evolution beyond what even the dungeon expected. Level 5 of the Abyss was a place where reality itself seemed negotiable. Gravity shifted without warning. Time flowed at different rates in different areas. The monsters here weren't just powerful, they were conceptual. Creatures born from ideas made manifest, living embodiments of fear, hunger, rage, despair. Kai's first encounter on level 5 nearly killed him, despite all his preparation. A creature called a thought devourer, a being that existed primarily in the mental plane, attacked his consciousness directly. His corruption, ironically, saved him. The dungeon essence woven through his being was alien enough to the creature's understanding that it couldn't fully grasp his mind. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of fighting an enemy that had no physical form, that attacked through dreams and memories and fears. But Kai had learned to weaponize his corruption, to use the very thing that made him less human as a shield against attacks that targeted the human psyche. When the thought devourer finally dissolved, consumed by Kai's relentless counterattack, he gained something unprecedented, a new attribute the system had never shown before: mental fortitude, a measure of his resistance to psychic and conceptual attacks. It started at 43, already higher than some of his physical stats had been when he first arrived. Day 320, Kael discovered that level 5 contained something the upper levels didn't: essence fonts. Places where raw dungeon power erupted like geysers, creating temporary pools of concentrated essence. Touching a crystalline vein was dangerous. Stepping into an essence font was potentially fatal. Kael did it anyway. His corruption jumped from 68% to 75% in a single event, but his level skyrocketed from 48 to 56. His attributes all increased by double digits, and he gained a new passive skill called Essence Regeneration, allowing him to naturally recover corrupted essence over time, making him effectively self-sustaining in high mana environments. The Keeper found him 2 days later, still recovering from the font immersion. "You're insane, absolutely insane. Most who try that become mindless essence constructs, all power and no consciousness. But you converted it, controlled it. How?" Kael looked at his hands, watching corruption patterns pulse with internal light. "I stopped fighting what I was becoming, started working with it instead. The corruption isn't a disease, it's evolution, adaptation, the dungeon changing me into something that belongs here." 75%, the Keeper said quietly. "You're past the point of return now. Even if you left the abyss, you could never go back to surface life. The normal world would reject you. Mana that dense in your system, you'd poison anything you touched." "Good," Kael said simply. "I never wanted to go back anyway." Days 325 through 400 were spent mastering Level 5's unique challenges. Kael learned to navigate areas where time moved differently, aging years in minutes, or experiencing hours in seconds. He developed techniques to fight in zero-gravity zones where traditional combat was impossible. He hunted creatures that existed in states of quantum uncertainty, learning to strike at probabilities rather than certainties. His combat style evolved beyond even the artistry of earlier months. Now he was fighting like the dungeon itself, using reality-warping techniques that shouldn't be possible for any hunter. Essence constructs that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. Attacks that struck backward through time, damaging enemies before he'd even thrown the technique. Defenses that absorbed damage by shunting it into pocket dimensions he created and destroyed at will. By day 400, Kael's level had reached 63. His corruption was holding steady at 78%, kept stable by maxed corruption resistance, and his new understanding of how to balance essence absorption with his remaining humanity. The Keeper revealed something significant on day 410. There's a legend among the Changed Ones who've survived long enough to remember. A rumor of something deeper than level 5. Level 7, they call it, though no one knows if level 6 exists or if the dungeon just skips the number. They say that at level 7 the abyss shows its true nature, that those who reach it either ascend to something beyond hunter or monster, or they're completely consumed. How do I get there? Trial of Transcendence, somewhere on level 5, only appears for those who've proven themselves worthy of the attempt. I don't know where it is. The dungeon decides who sees it and when. Kael spent the next 100 days pushing himself harder than ever. He sought out the strongest monsters, the deadliest environments, the most dangerous challenges. His corruption crept up to 80%. His level hit 70. His attributes pushed firmly into A-rank territory across the board, with his mana stat approaching S-rank levels. Day 520, the trial appeared. Not a door this time. A rift in reality itself, hanging in the center of a massive chamber, pulsing with more power than Kael had felt since touching his first essence font. The system provided a simple message: Trial of Transcendence. Complete transformation or final death. No middle ground, no retreat once entered. Kael spent 3 days preparing, absorbed as much essence as his body could handle, pushing his corruption to 83%. Refined all his skills to their highest possible levels. Meditated on what it meant to transcend, to move beyond the limitations of his human origin. On day 523, he entered the rift, The trial was everything and nothing at once. Kai found himself in a space between spaces, a void where the abyss's consciousness touched him directly. Not as a voice or vision, but as pure understanding transmitted directly into his mind. The dungeon showed him what it was. Not a location created by the gates. The gates hadn't created dungeons, they'd connected to places that already existed. The abyss of eternity was older than Earth itself. Older than most universes. A being that existed across dimensions, using dungeons as its sensory organs, experiencing reality through the hunters and monsters that entered its depths. And it wanted him. Wanted to make him into something more than hunter or monster. An avatar. A living extension of its will in the physical world. The price was everything human that remained in him. The reward was power beyond A rank, beyond S rank, beyond any classification the Hunter Association recognized. Kai considered the offer. 83% corrupted. Already more dungeon than human in many ways. What were the final 17% of his humanity worth? Then he remembered. The Emperor's smile. The Academy's contempt. 3 years of being told he was worthless trash. He'd survived the abyss not by becoming the dungeon's puppet, but by maintaining his will, his drive, his core identity even as everything else changed. Surrender that now, and the Emperor would be right. He would be trash, just in a different form. No, Kai said into the void. I'll take your power. I'll accept the corruption, but I stay me. That's not negotiable. The abyss's response was something like amusement, like respect, as if it had been testing him, seeing if he had the strength to refuse even when offered everything. Power flooded into Kai, but different from before, not transforming him, but elevating him. The corruption didn't increase. Instead, it refined, compressed, became something more than simple dungeon essence. When Kai emerged from the trial, 60 hours had passed outside. 3 full days of subjective time inside the void, compressed into a single transcendent experience. His status had changed fundamentally. His corruption now showed 83%, but with a notation. Stable, refined, controlled. His level had jumped to 75. His rank, after months of showing D with error messages, finally updated. Custom Abyss Lord, not a standard hunter rank, a completely new classification, acknowledging that he'd become something the system didn't have categories for. His attributes had all broken into S-rank territory. His skills had condensed and evolved, replacing long lists with a handful of master-level abilities. Combat Mastery. Abyss style became Abyss Combat Arts, incorporating everything he'd learned into a single comprehensive fighting system. Essence Manipulation evolved into Reality Manipulation. Essence, allowing him to rewrite localized reality using corrupted mana. And he'd gained a new title. First of the Changed Lords, a designation that marked him as the first to successfully negotiate with the Abyss rather than submit to it. First to maintain humanity while accepting transformation. First to achieve balance between 2 states that should be impossible to reconcile. The Keeper found him on day 526, took one look at what he'd become, and laughed that breaking glass laugh. You did it. You actually did it. In 7 decades, I've never seen anyone come out of the Transcendence trial still themselves. Most become mindless dungeon champions. Others dissolve entirely. But you're still Kai Chen. Just more. How much more? Kai asked, feeling power coil through him in ways he was still learning to understand. Test it. Anything in level 5. See what you can do now. Kai found a gravity titan, one of the most powerful creatures on the level, a being that could crush mountains by manipulating gravitational fields. The fight lasted 30 seconds. Kai's new abilities let him move through the titan's gravity wells like they were light breezes, his essence attacks bypassing the creature's defenses by operating on a level of reality the monster couldn't defend against. When he absorbed the titan's core, his corruption didn't increase at all, His corruption resistance and his refined essence state meant he could process even the most potent monster cores without risk. He'd reached a plateau, a state of perfect balance between human and dungeon that would let him grow in power without losing himself. Days 527 through 600 were spent exploring his new capabilities and hunting the strongest monsters level 5 had to offer. Kai's level climbed to 80. His reputation among the Changed Ones spread. The Abyss Lord who'd transcended without surrendering. The hunter who'd become something new while staying himself. The Keeper revealed on day 600 that level 7 had appeared for him. The path was open, but he also warned, level 7 is where the Abyss keeps its true guardians. Creatures that have existed since this place first connected to reality. They're not bound by the rules of normal monsters. They can't be killed, only defeated and sealed temporarily. And they remember everyone who faces them. How long until I'm ready? You're already stronger than I ever was. But strength isn't enough for level 7. You need wisdom. Understanding. The Guardians don't just fight with power. They fight with concepts, with ideas, with fundamental forces. You need to master not just essence manipulation, but reality itself. Kai looked at his hands, watching the refined corruption pulse through his veins in patterns he could now control consciously. 83% corrupted. Level 80, power that put him above most A-rank hunters despite being trapped in a dungeon for 600 days. 399 days remained. Enough time to prepare for level 7. Enough time to master reality manipulation. Enough time to transform from Abyss Lord into something even greater. Jung Taeyang's face still haunted his thoughts sometimes. The Emperor who'd thrown him away. Who'd created this monster through casual cruelty. Kai wondered what the prodigy was doing now. Probably graduated, probably leading a top guild, probably thinking himself untouchable. The Emperor had no idea what was coming. Had no concept of what he'd unleashed into the depths. 399 days until Kai would return to the surface. 399 days until Jung Taeyang learned the price of his arrogance. The countdown continued. The final phase of Kai's imprisonment began with day 601. 399 days remaining. 399 days to achieve something unprecedented, mastering level 7 of the Abyss of Eternity. The descent to level 7 took a full week. Not because of distance, but because the path itself was a trial. Kai had to navigate through layers of distorted reality, through time loops that threatened to trap him for eternity, through spaces that existed in negative dimensions where forward movement paradoxically took him backward. His Abyss Walker passive and his newly evolved reality manipulation, essence skill were the only reasons he succeeded. Lesser hunters, even S-ranks, would have been lost in the transitional space forever. Level 7 was beautiful in a way that hurt to perceive. Crystalline structures larger than mountains floated in a void, lit by no visible source. Rivers of pure essence flowed upward, defying gravity, connecting the floating islands in networks of liquid power. And the sky, if it could be called that, showed other dimensions overlapping, creating a kaleidoscope of possible realities. The Keeper's warning about Guardians proved accurate on day 609. Kai encountered his first, Chronos Echo, a being that existed across all points in its own timeline simultaneously. Fighting it meant fighting past, present, and future versions all at once. The battle lasted 3 subjective weeks, compressed into 4 hours of external time. Kai won by using his reality manipulation to create temporal anchors, fixing himself in the present, while letting the Echo's attacks phase through his time-locked state. When he finally landed the killing blow, Chronos Echo didn't die. It simply paused, frozen in a moment of defeat, and whispered, "You'll do. The Abyss chooses well." The Guardian's essence was different from monster cores. It didn't increase his power directly. Instead, it granted understanding, temporal mechanics, how to perceive and manipulate the 4th dimension, how to see causal chains and exploit them. Kai's corruption didn't increase, but his mental fortitude attribute jumped from 62 to 91. His intelligence attribute, which had been falling behind his physical stats, surged to match his strength and agility. Days 610 through 700 were spent hunting Level 7's other inhabitants and seeking out the remaining guardians. Each one taught him something fundamental about reality. Spatial Sovereign showed him how to fold space, creating shortcuts through distance, storing entire battlefields in pocket dimensions. Its defeat granted him the ability to manipulate the first 3 dimensions as easily as the 4th. Entropy Incarnate taught him about energy states and decay, how to accelerate or reverse the heat death of systems, how to drain vitality from enemies, or supercharge his own recovery. Defeating it required Kai to temporarily achieve a state of perfect energy equilibrium, becoming immune to its decay aura. Probability Weaver demonstrated quantum manipulation, showing him how to collapse wave functions in his favor, how to force unlikely outcomes to manifest. That battle took 100 attempts across multiple timelines before Kai found the single path to victory. By day 750, Kai had defeated 6 of Level 7's 7 guardians. His level had climbed to 92. His attributes were all firmly in the S-Rank range now, with his mana and mental fortitude pushing toward SS-Rank. His corruption remained stable at 83%, refined to such purity that it granted power without risk. The 7th Guardian was different. The Keeper had mentioned it only in whispers. The Abyss core, the dungeon's own heart made manifest. Fighting it meant fighting the Abyss itself. Kai found the core on day 770, in a chamber at Level 7's deepest point. It wasn't a creature or a being, it was a concept given form. The pure idea of dungeon made real. Attacking it was like trying to punch a thought or stab a memory. The battle didn't use fists or essence or reality warping. It was a contest of wills. The Abyss pressed its consciousness against Kai's, trying to overwhelm him, absorb him, make him one with the dungeon completely. For 72 hours, Kai fought to maintain his identity. The Abyss showed him easier paths. Accept complete transformation, become a perfect dungeon champion, wield unlimited power within its depths. Surrender individuality, become one with something greater than himself. Every time, Kai refused, not with power, but with memory. He remembered being F-Rank, remembered the beatings, the humiliation, the Emperor's smile. Those memories hurt, but they were his. They defined him. They made him who he was. And who he was someone who survived by refusing to give up. By enduring when ending would be easier. By staying himself even when transformation was offered. On the 73rd hour, the Abyss core stopped pressing. It had been testing him again, seeing if his will could match his power. And he'd passed. The core didn't grant essence or abilities. It granted recognition, official acknowledgement from the dungeon itself. Kai's title updated: Abyss Sovereign, Uncorrupted Lord, First of the Balanced. His corruption crystallized, could never increase or decrease from 83%. He was permanently balanced between human and dungeon, belonging fully to neither, master of both. A new skill appeared: Abyss Authority. Within dungeon environments, Kai could command reality with the same power the dungeon itself wielded. Not everywhere, only in places like the Abyss. But in those places, he was essentially a god. Days 773 through 800 were spent learning to use Abyss Authority without destroying everything around him. The power was intoxicating, overwhelming. With a thought, Kai could reshape Level 7's geography, could create or destroy monsters, could manipulate the fundamental rules that governed dungeon physics. The Keeper helped, teaching him control, showing him how previous changed lords had failed by letting power consume judgment. Strength without wisdom is just destruction. You've gained ultimate power in this place. Now prove you're wise enough to wield it properly. By day 850, Kai had mastered the basics. He couldn't create permanent changes to the Abyss, that required the dungeon's consent. But he could manipulate, could bend, could reshape anything temporarily. In combat, it made him unstoppable within the dungeon's depths. Days 851 through 900 were dedicated to a different kind of preparation. Physical training had reached its peak. His attributes wouldn't grow significantly higher without ascending to SS rank or beyond, and that required achievements no single dungeon could provide. So Kai focused on tactics, strategy, understanding the world he'd returned to. The Keeper, who'd once been a surface hunter, shared intelligence about how hunter society worked, how guilds operated, what the Academy Emperor's position likely was after nearly 3 years. Jung Taiyang would be untouchable by now. Graduated with honors, certainly. Recruited by a top guild or leading his own. Surrounded by powerful allies, protected by fame and connections. Killing him wouldn't be as simple as being stronger. Kai didn't want simple murder anyway. He wanted the Emperor to understand, to feel what it was like being powerless against overwhelming force, to know the terror of facing something that shouldn't exist. Days 901 through 950 were spent crafting tools for the surface world. Kai used Abyss authority to create equipment that could function outside the dungeon. Armor woven from refined corruption that could regenerate damage. Weapons forged from crystallized essence that could cut through any defense. Artifacts that would let him use his reality manipulation in the low mana environment of Earth's surface. Day 975, the Keeper delivered final wisdom. You're ready to leave. More than ready. But understand, you're not human anymore. Not really. Surface hunters will sense your corruption. The Hunter Association will try to classify you, to control you. They won't succeed, but they'll try. And the Emperor, when he sees you, he won't recognize you, won't know that the monster facing him is the trash he threw away. Good, Kai said. Let it be a surprise. Days 976 through 990 were spent saying goodbye to the Abyss. Kai visited every level he'd conquered, every chamber where he'd fought and bled and transformed. This place had been his hell and his salvation, his prison and his forge. The dungeon had broken him down to nothing and rebuilt him into something unprecedented. Abyss Sovereign. A being that balanced human will with dungeon power. Strong enough to rival SS-Rank hunters while maintaining the drive and determination that made him human. On day 999, Kai stood before the portal that would return him to the upper levels. The same dimensional rift that had brought him here, now reopened through Abyss authority. Beyond it lay the path back to floor 77, to the chamber where the Emperor had thrown him away. The Keeper made a final appearance. Will you kill him? The Emperor? Kai considered the question. No. Death is too quick. Too merciful. I want him to live with what he created. Want him to see the Academy's trash become untouchable. Want every moment of his remaining life shadowed by the knowledge that his cruelty built his own destruction. Revenge, the Keeper said, still the most human motivation of all. I never stopped being human, Kai replied. That's what made this work. The dungeon tried to consume me, tried to transform me, and I let it, but only on my terms. I took the power and kept myself. That's what the Emperor could never understand. Strength isn't about natural talent. It's about refusing to quit even when the universe itself tells you to give up. Kai stepped through the portal. The transition was instant. One moment, the impossible geometry of level 7. The next, the familiar chamber of floor 77. The place where he'd been abandoned 999 days ago. Everything was exactly as he remembered. The crystalline structures. The Chrono Devourer's remains, long since decayed. The scorch marks from the expedition's battle. But Kai had changed in every way possible. From level 12 F rank to level 97 Abyss Sovereign. From 8 mana to over 3,000. From worthless trash to something that made the dungeon itself acknowledge him. He activated his hunter interface for the first time in months. The status screen appeared, and Kai smiled at what he saw. Name, Kai Chen. Rank, Custom Abyss Sovereign Level, 97 titles, First of the Changed Lords, Abyss Sovereign, Uncorrupted Lord, First of the Balanced, Dungeon Transcendent Strength, 342, Agility, 338, Vitality, 329, Intelligence, 315, Mana, 3,212, Mental Fortitude, 278 Skills, Abyss Combat Arts, Reality Manipulation, Essence, Abyss Authority, Void Step, Dimensional Awareness, Essence Vision, Corruption Resistance, Maxed Out, and dozens more, all maxed or near maxed. Corruption, 83%, permanently stable, refined, perfected. Kai looked at the passage leading up toward the surface. Somewhere above, the Emperor was going about his life, believing himself untouchable, believing the trash he'd disposed of was long dead. Soon, very soon, Jung Taiyang would learn the truth, would discover that his cruel joke had birthed his own nemesis, would understand that throwing someone into hell doesn't destroy them. Sometimes it just makes them into something hell itself acknowledges as worthy. Kai began the ascent toward the surface, toward the world that had rejected him, toward the reckoning the Emperor had been building toward for 999 days. The Academy Emperor's nightmare was about to become reality, and Kai Chen, the F-rank trash, the forgotten failure, the discarded mistake, was finally going home. If this story of transformation gripped you, if Kai's journey from worthless F-rank to something beyond comprehension resonated with your soul, then smash that like button and let the algorithm know that stories of the underdog rising deserve to be seen. Subscribe for more deep dives into the best Manhwa has to offer, where we don't just recap, but truly explore every twist, every transformation, every moment that makes these stories unforgettable. Drop a comment telling me, what would you do if you were trapped in an SSS-Rank dungeon for 999 days? Would you break, or would you become something greater? I'll see you in the next one, where we dive into another story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will blow your mind. Imagine being the strongest person alive. Not just strong, not even incredibly powerful. We're talking about SSS-Rank, the absolute pinnacle of human achievement in a world where magic and monsters had become everyday reality. Picture yourself standing at the very top of humanity's food chain, respected, feared, and worshipped by millions. You've saved countless lives, defeated legendary beasts that could level entire cities, and amassed wealth that most people couldn't earn in 10 lifetimes. Now imagine the person you love most in this world. The one person you trusted above all others. The woman who stood by your side through blood, sweat, and tears, looking you dead in the eyes and stabbing you in the back. Not metaphorically, literally. And that's just the beginning of the nightmare. Because when you wake up, you're not dead. You're trapped. Imprisoned in a twisted game world where death is only a temporary inconvenience, and the only way out is to clear 999 magic dungeons, each more nightmarish than the last. Oh, and if you fail? You don't just die. You're erased from existence itself, as if you never existed at all. This is the story of Kael Voidheart, the SSS-Rank hero who had everything and lost it all in a single moment of betrayal. And trust me when I say that what happened to him makes every revenge story you've ever heard look like a children's bedtime tale. Let's rewind to understand just how far Kael fell. In his world, the Great Rupture had occurred 15 years ago, tearing holes between dimensions and flooding Earth with magical energy and monstrous entities from countless other realms. Humanity adapted, as it always does, by awakening to magical abilities. The Hunter system categorized people based on their power levels, from F-rank, barely stronger than normal humans, all the way up to the legendary SSS-Rank. Most people never made it past C-rank. B-rank hunters were considered elite. A-rank hunters were celebrities, commanding massive salaries and international recognition. S-rank hunters were walking natural disasters, capable of soloing entire dungeons that would require teams of dozens of lesser hunters. SS-rank hunters were myths, with only about 50 existing worldwide at any given time. And then there was SSS-Rank, the absolute peak, the unreachable summit. In the entire world across all continents and nations, only 7 people had ever achieved SSS-Rank status. 7 out of 8 billion people. Kael Voidheart was number 3 on that impossibly exclusive list. He'd earned his position through 15 years of grinding through dungeons, pushing his limits, and surviving encounters that should have killed him 1,000 times over. His signature ability, Void Severance, allowed him to cut through anything, absolutely anything, by creating microscopic tears in reality itself. Magical barriers, legendary armor, even conceptual defenses that existed outside normal physics meant nothing to Kael's blade. If he swung his sword at it, it would be cut. Period. But power alone doesn't make someone a legend. What set Kael apart was his mind. While other top rankers relied on raw power or overwhelming magical reserves, Kael approached every dungeon like a chess match. He studied patterns, identified weaknesses, and struck with surgical precision. Other SSS-rank hunters might take days or weeks to clear an S-rank dungeon. Kael did it in hours, sometimes minutes, because he understood the fundamental rules that governed how dungeons operated. His reputation was immaculate. Never failed a mission. Never lost a team member under his command. Never accepted bribes or engaged in the political games that consumed so many high rankers. Kael was clean, professional, and devastatingly effective. Nations competed to hire him. Guild leaders offered him blank checks. He could have had anything, anyone, any position in the world. But Kael only wanted one thing. Her. Seraphina Ashcroft. The memory of how they met still burned bright in Kael's mind, even as everything else would later turn to ash. It was 7 years ago, during a massive dungeon break in Seoul. A portal had torn open in the middle of the city, vomiting forth an army of high-level demons that should never have appeared in a standard gate. The local guilds were overwhelmed within minutes. Hunters were dying by the dozens. Kael had been in Tokyo at the time, but he dropped everything when he heard about the crisis. By the time he arrived, the city was in flames. And that's where he saw her for the first time, standing alone in a ruined street, facing down 3 greater demons simultaneously. She should have been dead. By all logical assessment, she was vastly outmatched. But Seraphina wasn't fighting with logic. She was dancing. Her magic was unlike anything Kael had ever witnessed. Where most mages relied on destructive force, Seraphina wielded illusions and mind magic with an artistry that transcended mere combat. She made the demons see their greatest fears, their deepest shames, their most haunting memories. She turned their own power against them, made them attack each other, drove them to madness without ever landing a physical blow. It was beautiful, terrifying, perfect. Kael had joined the fight, and together they'd turned the tide of the battle. The synergy between them was immediate and undeniable. His raw power combined with her tactical magic created combinations that neither could achieve alone. They cleared the dungeon break in record time, saving thousands of lives in the process. After the battle, covered in demon blood and breathing hard from exhaustion, Seraphina had looked at him with those striking violet eyes and said something Kael would never forget. "You cut through reality itself, but you still haven't learned to see through illusions. That's going to get you killed someday." She'd been right, of course. Just not in the way either of them expected. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. Both of them were intensely private people who'd seen too many relationships destroyed by the pressures of high-level hunter life. But gradually, trust built between them. Shared missions turned into shared meals. Professional respect evolved into genuine affection. Within a year, they were inseparable. Within 2, they were discussing plans for after they retired from active hunting. Seraphina was an A-rank hunter, which might seem far below Kael's level, but rank didn't tell the whole story. Her specialty in illusion magic made her invaluable for reconnaissance and infiltration missions. She'd saved Kael's life more than once by detecting hidden threats or misdirecting enemies at critical moments. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Or so he thought. The day everything fell apart started like any other high-stakes mission. The International Hunter Association had detected an anomaly, a unique dungeon gate that had appeared in the Siberian wilderness. The energy readings were off the charts, suggesting it might be a mythic tier dungeon, a classification so rare that only a handful had ever been recorded. Mythic dungeons didn't just offer incredible rewards. They fundamentally changed the people who cleared them, granting abilities that transcended the normal system limitations. For an SSS-Rank hunter like Kael, a mythic dungeon represented the ultimate challenge and the ultimate opportunity. The association wanted him to lead a small, elite team to explore it. Kael had immediately requested Seraphina as his second-in-command. She'd accepted without hesitation. The team assembled at the gate 3 days later. Besides Kael and Seraphina, there were 4 other hunters, all S-rank or higher. Marcus Chen, a Chinese powerhouse specializing in earth magic. Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese speed-type fighter whose movements approached teleportation. Diego Santos, a Brazilian berserker with regeneration abilities. And Natasha Volkov, a Russian ice mage with precision control that rivaled Kael's own. On paper, it was the perfect team. Balanced, experienced, powerful. Every member had cleared dozens of high-level dungeons. They should have been able to handle anything. The dungeon entrance itself was unsettling. Unlike normal gates that appeared as shimmering portals or obvious rifts in space, this one manifested as a perfectly smooth obsidian door, floating 3 meters above the frozen ground. Ancient runes covered its surface, pulsing with a sickly purple light that hurt to look at directly. "Bad vibes," Marcus had muttered, hefting his massive warhammer. "Really, really bad vibes." "Agreed," Yuki added, her hand resting on her katana's hilt. "The energy signature is wrong. It's not matching any known dungeon classification." But Kael had been too focused on the potential rewards to listen to his instincts. That was his first mistake. His second was trusting Seraphina completely. They'd entered the dungeon as a unified team. They'd fought through the first 3 levels together, facing enemies that would have destroyed most S-rank groups. The monsters inside were bizarre amalgamations of different creatures, as if someone had taken parts from demons, beasts, and elementals and stitched them together into new horrors. But they'd managed. Kael's void severance cut through everything. Marcus's earth walls protected them from magical bombardment. Yuki's speed allowed her to eliminate key threats before they could activate dangerous abilities. Diego soaked damage and healed through injuries that would have killed normal people. Natasha controlled the battlefield with frozen terrain. And Seraphina provided critical intelligence about enemy patterns and weaknesses. Everything was going according to plan until they reached the 4th level. The 4th level was different from the others. Instead of a maze of corridors or a series of combat arenas, it opened into a massive chamber that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. The floor was made of dark crystal that reflected their images back at them in disturbing ways. The ceiling, if there even was one, disappeared into darkness beyond sight. And in the center of the chamber stood a pedestal. On that pedestal rested a sphere of pure white light, beautiful and terrifying in its simplicity. "The dungeon core," Seraphina had whispered, her voice filled with an emotion Kael couldn't quite identify. "That's the dungeon core. If we destroy it, we clear the entire dungeon instantly." It should have been too easy. It should have been suspicious. But Kael was exhausted from the fighting, eager to finish the mission, too focused on victory to see the trap being laid. "Diego, Marcus, take the flanks," Kael had ordered. "Yuki, Natasha, rear guard. Seraphina and I will approach the core. Standard formation, watch for ambushes." They'd moved forward cautiously, weapons ready, senses alert for any sign of danger. Kael remembered thinking how strange it was that the final challenge seemed so anticlimactic. Where were the guardians? Where were the traps? He got his answer when they were 3 meters from the pedestal. Seraphina's hand, the hand he'd held countless times, the hand that had healed his wounds and caressed his face, suddenly sprouted a blade of pure crystallized magic. Before Kael's combat instincts could even trigger, that blade was buried deep in his back, piercing through his spine and out through his chest. The pain was indescribable. Not just physical, though that was agonizing enough. This was soul-deep pain, the kind that came from having your entire reality shattered in an instant. "I'm sorry," Seraphina whispered in his ear, her voice actually sounding regretful. "But this is the price of true power. The dungeon core requires a sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice. It needs the life force of an SSS-Rank hunter. Your power will fuel my ascension." Kael tried to activate Void Severance, tried to cut through her blade and escape, but he couldn't concentrate. The blade was doing something to his magical core, draining his power, his very life essence. He watched in horror as his teammates turned on each other. Marcus's warhammer crushed Yuki's skull before she could react. Diego's berserker rage turned on Natasha, his regeneration making him unstoppable as he tore her apart. Then Marcus and Diego killed each other in a choreographed sequence that was clearly planned. It was all staged. All of it. The entire mission had been designed to get him here. To this moment, to this betrayal. "Why?" Kael managed to gasp out, blood filling his mouth. "Because you're too good," Seraphina replied, and now her voice held no regret, only cold calculation. "Too pure, too noble. The world doesn't need heroes like you, Kael. It needs people willing to do whatever it takes to gain power. People like me." She twisted the blade, and Kael's vision went white with agony. "The others thought I loved you," she continued, almost conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of his murder. "They were wrong. I studied you. I became exactly what you needed, said exactly what you wanted to hear, played the role of devoted partner to perfection. All of it was an illusion, Kael. The greatest one I've ever created. And you, for all your power, for all your skill at cutting through reality, never saw through it." Kael's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, life draining from him rapidly now. "You were a means to an end," Seraphina said softly, placing her hand on the dungeon core. "Nothing more. But thank you for the power you're about to give me. I'll put it to better use than you ever did." The last thing Kael saw before his vision went dark was Seraphina's body glowing with stolen power, absorbing the energy from the dungeon core and all the dead hunters around her. The last thing he heard was her laughter, triumphant and cruel. And then there was nothing. Darkness. Silence. The absolute void of death. Except it wasn't the end. When Kael's consciousness returned, the first thing he noticed was that he wasn't in pain anymore. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't dead. The third thing he noticed was that everything was very, very wrong. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on cold stone in a room he'd never seen before. The walls were made of the same dark crystal as the 4th level of that cursed dungeon. But this chamber was smaller, more contained. Torches burned with blue flames that gave off no heat. And floating in the air directly above his head was text. Glowing, impossible text that looked like something from a video game interface. Kael stared at the text, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. He was dead. He should be dead. Seraphina had killed him, stolen his power, left him to rot in that dungeon. But he wasn't dead. He was here. Wherever here was. He sat up slowly, checking his body. No wounds, no scars. He felt weak, drastically, horrifyingly weak. His magical power, which had been as natural as breathing, as fundamental as his heartbeat, was barely a whisper of what it once was. He tried to activate Void Severance and felt nothing. The ability that had defined him, that had made him one of the 7 strongest people in existence, was simply gone. First time? A voice asked from the shadows. Kael spun around, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. A figure emerged from the corner of the room, a young woman with short black hair and tired eyes that looked far older than her face suggested. "Who are you?" Kael demanded, trying to summon any scrap of power he could find. Nothing came. He was helpless, ordinary, pathetically weak. "Name's Lyra," the woman said, leaning against the wall with the casual posture of someone who'd been here too long. "Been a prisoner here for about 3 years now. Cleared 273 dungeons so far. 726 to go." 3 years. 273 dungeons. The numbers didn't make sense. How is that possible? You'd have to be clearing dungeons almost every day. "Welcome to hell," Lyra replied with a bitter smile. "Time works differently here. A week in the prison might be a day outside, or a year might be an hour. There's no pattern to it, no way to predict or control it. All we know is that we're stuck here until we clear all 999 dungeons, and most people don't make it past the first 100. Kael's mind raced, trying to understand, trying to find a logical explanation for the impossible situation he found himself in. What is this place? Who created it? What's the purpose? "Good questions," Lyra said. "Been asking them for 3 years. Haven't found any good answers. Best guess? This is some kind of testing ground created by an entity far more powerful than anything we've ever encountered. The dungeons get progressively harder, designed to break us down, reshape us, turn us into something new. Or kill us," Kael added darkly. "Oh, you can't actually die here," Lyra corrected. "Well, you can, but you'll just respawn in this room with all your injuries healed. The catch is that every time you die, you lose a portion of your memories. Die enough times, and you'll forget who you were, why you're here, everything that made you human. You'll become a hollow shell that just mindlessly repeats the dungeons forever." The implications of that hit Kael like a physical blow. This wasn't just a prison. It was a torture device designed to slowly erase people from existence while keeping their bodies alive to suffer through it. "How many times have you died?" he asked quietly. Lyra's expression became haunted. 17 times. I can't remember my mother's face anymore. Can't remember the name of my first dog. There are holes in my memory. Blank spaces where important moments used to be. Every death takes a little more of who I was." Kael felt a surge of empathy for this stranger who'd suffered so much. But beneath that empathy was something darker. Something that had been born in the moment of Seraphina's betrayal. Rage. Pure, burning, all-consuming rage. He'd been murdered, stripped of his power, thrown into this nightmare prison. And somewhere out there, Seraphina was probably living her best life, enjoying the power she'd stolen from him, laughing about how easy it had been to fool him. No. That couldn't stand. He wouldn't let it stand. "Tell me everything," Kael said to Lyra, his voice hard as steel. "Tell me how this place works, how to survive, how to get stronger. I'm going to clear all 999 dungeons, and then I'm going to find my way back to the real world and make the person who sent me here regret ever being born." Lyra studied him for a long moment, something like hope flickering in her tired eyes. "You're different from the others," she said finally. "Most new prisoners spend their first few days crying or denying reality or trying to find a way to cheat the system. But you've already accepted it and started planning. What were you before you came here?" "I was an SSS-Rank hunter," Kael replied. "One of the 7 strongest people in the world. And I'm going to be that strong again. Stronger. Strong enough that Betrayal will never touch me again." "SSS-Rank?" Lyra's eyes widened. "Shit. No wonder you're here. This place specifically targets the powerful. The more potential you had outside, the harder the dungeons are inside. You're going to have a rough time." "Good," Kael said, and he meant it. I don't want easy. I want challenges that will force me to evolve beyond what I was, because what I was clearly wasn't enough. Lyra laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. All right, former SSS ranker, let me teach you how to survive in hell. First lesson, forget everything you think you know about dungeons. The rules here are different, twisted, designed to exploit your expectations. Second lesson, trust no one. Some prisoners will try to form alliances, and some of those alliances are genuine, but others are just looking for someone to sacrifice when things get desperate. Third lesson, pay attention to the system notifications. They're cryptic and often misleading, but they're the only consistent source of information you'll get. Kael absorbed every word, filing it away in his mind. He'd always been good at learning, at adapting to new situations. That skill had helped him reach SSS rank in the first place. It would help him survive here too. One more thing, Lyra added, her expression serious. Whatever happened to you before you came here, whatever drove you to this point, you need to let it go. Anger is useful, but obsession will get you killed. Or worse, it'll make you die so many times that you forget what you were angry about in the first place. But Kael shook his head. The anger is all I have left. My power is gone. My position is gone. My life is gone. But the memory of betrayal, that's mine. And I'm going to hold on to it no matter how many times I die, because it's the only thing that will keep me human in this place. Lyra didn't argue. She just sighed and gestured toward a door that Kael hadn't noticed before. The first dungeon is through there. It's always the same for everyone, a tutorial level designed to teach you the basic mechanics. If you can't clear it, you're not surviving here anyway. Good luck, former SSS ranker. Try not to die too quickly. Kael stood, testing his body, getting used to the weakness that felt so foreign after years of overwhelming power. He was starting from 0, maybe even less than 0. But that was fine. He'd climbed to the top once before. He could do it again. And this time, when he reached the summit, he'd make sure no one could ever knock him down again. He walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier than it should. Not from physical weight, but from the psychological burden of everything that had happened. But he kept walking, because stopping meant giving up. And Kael Voidheart had never given up on anything in his life. The door opened before he could touch it, revealing a swirling vortex of energy beyond. Kael took a deep breath, steadying himself. Seraphina, he whispered to the empty air. I'm coming back, and when I do, you're going to wish you'd made sure I stayed dead. Then he stepped through the portal, leaving behind the safety of the respawn chamber and entering the first of 999 nightmares he'd have to overcome. The fall of Kael Voidheart, SSS-Rank hero, was complete. But the rise of something far more dangerous had just begun. The first dungeon was nothing like Kael expected. After 15 years of exploring hundreds of different dungeons in the real world, he'd developed a sixth sense for how they operated. Dungeons followed patterns. They had rules. You could predict their layouts, anticipate their challenges, prepare appropriate countermeasures. This dungeon laughed at all of that. Kael found himself standing in what appeared to be an ordinary forest. Trees stretched toward a sky that looked perfectly normal, complete with clouds and sunshine that felt warm on his skin. Birds chirped in the distance. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful, serene, absolutely terrifying in its normalcy. A system notification appeared in his vision. The casual cruelty of that last tip made Kael's blood run cold. If running, hiding, and fighting were all useless, what were his options? He didn't have long to wonder. The peaceful forest, sounds cut off abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete that Kael could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. And then, from somewhere behind him, came a sound that raised every hair on his body. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Something was walking toward him, with the confidence of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to go. Kael spun around but saw nothing. The forest was empty. The footsteps continued, getting closer, their source invisible. His first instinct was to run. Every survival instinct screamed at him to put as much distance as possible between himself and those approaching steps. But the system warning had been clear. Running is useless. So instead, Kael stood his ground, forcing his body to remain still despite every nerve-firing panic signals. He tried to activate Void Severance again, knowing it wouldn't work, but unable to stop himself from trying. Nothing. He was completely powerless. The footsteps stopped directly in front of him. Kael stared at empty air, seeing nothing, but feeling a presence so malevolent it made his skin crawl. "I can't see you," Kael said aloud, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "But I know you're there. What are you?" Silence. Then, slowly, impossibly, the air began to shimmer. A form coalesced from nothing, revealing a creature that defied description. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Its limbs bent in directions that shouldn't be possible. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blank canvas of smooth skin, with no features except for a mouth that opened far wider than physics should allow. And from that mouth came words in a voice that sounded like grinding metal and screaming wind combined. "I am what you will become if you fail. I am the echo of a prisoner who died too many times. I am what waits at the end of forgetting." Kael felt his stomach drop. This thing, this nightmare creature, had been a person once. Someone who'd gone through too many death cycles, lost too many memories, until nothing remained but this hollow shell hunting new prisoners. "I won't end up like you," Kael said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince the creature or himself. "They all say that. They all believe it. They are all wrong." The creature lunged forward with speed that should have been impossible for something that moved so wrong. Kael threw himself to the side, barely avoiding razor-sharp claws that carved deep gouges in the tree behind him. So much for fighting being suicide. He had no choice but to try. Kael had no weapons, no magic, nothing but his body and his mind. Against a creature that could move like that, with claws that could shred solid wood, his odds were approximately 0. But Kael hadn't reached SSS-Rank by giving up when the odds were against him. He analyzed the creature's movements as it prepared for another attack. The weird, wrong way it moved wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm. Its limbs bent backward because it was compensating for blind spots in its featureless face. It couldn't see in the traditional sense, probably tracked prey through sound or heat or some other sense. The creature attacked again. This time Kael didn't dodge away. He dove forward, under the swinging claws, rolling past the creature's legs. It howled in what might have been frustration, spinning with unnatural speed to track him. But Kael was already moving, putting trees between himself and the hunter. Not running away, but controlling the space, using the environment to limit the creature's ability to attack. The forest itself seemed to be working against him, though. Branches that should have been easy to duck under suddenly hung lower. Roots that weren't there a moment ago erupted from the ground to trip him. The dungeon was adapting, changing to make the hunt more challenging. For 23 hours and 40 minutes, Kael played this deadly game of cat and mouse. He couldn't fight the creature directly. He couldn't hide from it. He couldn't outrun it. But he could stay one step ahead, could keep moving, could force it to waste energy on attacks that missed. His body screamed in protest. Without his magical enhancement, without the physical conditioning that came from being SSS-Rank, he was operating on pure adrenaline and willpower. Every muscle burned. His lungs felt like they were on fire. His vision started to blur from exhaustion. But he kept moving, because stopping meant dying. And while death here wouldn't be permanent, it would cost him memories. It would take pieces of who he was. And Kael refused to forget. Refused to let go of the anger and determination that drove him. The timer hit 0 just as Kael collapsed against a tree, unable to take another step. The forest dissolved around him, replaced by the familiar stone chamber where he'd first awakened. Kael barely registered the transition before he fell unconscious, his body finally giving in to the accumulated exhaustion. When he woke up, Lyra was sitting nearby, watching him with an expression of surprise. "You cleared the first dungeon with an A-rank rating on your first attempt," she said. "Most people die at least twice before they figure out the trick. How?" Kael sat up slowly, his body aching but functional. The exhaustion from the dungeon had reset along with his position. "What trick? I just survived for 24 hours like it asked." "Yeah, but the tutorial dungeon is specifically designed to teach you that brute force doesn't work here. You're supposed to die, respawn, learn from your mistake, try a different approach. The fact that you survived on the first try means you adapted in real time instead of needing the death cycle to teach you." "I've been adapting to survive for 15 years, Kael replied. "Old habits die hard." "Well, those old habits might keep you alive here longer than most," Lyra said. She gestured to the air in front of Kael. "Check your status screen. You should have access to it now." Kael focused on pulling up the interface, and text appeared in his vision. F rank. He'd fallen from SSS to F, the lowest possible classification. It was almost funny in a tragic way. "What's corruption level?" Kael asked, focusing on the unfamiliar stat. Lyra's expression darkened. "That's the real danger of this place. Every time you die, your corruption level goes up. Hit 100%, and you become one of those things that hunts new prisoners in the tutorial dungeons. Your humanity gets erased completely. How do you reduce it? You can't. Once corruption sets in, it's permanent. The only way to avoid it is to never die, which is basically impossible in the later dungeons." Kael absorbed this information, filing it away. So death wasn't just a loss of memories, it was a countdown to complete annihilation of self. The prison wasn't designed to rehabilitate or test, it was designed to slowly convert humans into monsters. "I need to understand the system better," Kael said. "How do I get stronger? How do skills work? What determines dungeon difficulty?" Lyra settled in, clearly ready for a long explanation. "All right, listen carefully because this is complicated. The power system here is nothing like the hunter ranks in the real world. You start at F rank, but you can level up by clearing dungeons and completing specific achievements. Each rank increase gives you a base stat boost and unlocks new skill slots." "Skill slots?" "You can't just learn unlimited skills here. You have a limited number of slots based on your rank. F rank gets 2 slots. E rank gets 3. And so on. You have to choose carefully because removing a skill to make room for a new one costs you experience points." That was a brutal limitation. In the real world, hunters could develop as many abilities as they had the talent and training for. Here, every choice mattered. "Skills come from dungeon rewards," Lyra continued. "But there's RNG involved. You might get a skill that's perfect for your build, or you might get something useless. The rank of your dungeon clear affects the quality of rewards. D rank clears give basic rewards. C rank gives uncommon. B rank gives rare. A rank gives epic. And S rank..." She paused, her expression becoming wistful. "I've only managed an S rank clear twice in 3 years. Both times I got legendary tier skills that fundamentally changed how I approach dungeons. If you can consistently hit S rank, you'll progress way faster than normal prisoners." Kael filed that away. S rank clears would be his target for every dungeon. Nothing less would be acceptable. "What about the dungeons themselves? Is there any pattern to them?" "That's where it gets really weird," Lyra said. "The dungeons seem to be personalized based on your fears, your weaknesses, your past trauma. No 2 prisoners experience the exact same dungeons. They're designed to break you psychologically as much as physically." That explained why the first dungeon had featured a creature born from someone who'd lost themselves to the death cycle. It was targeting Kael's fear of losing his identity, of becoming something less than human. "How many prisoners are here?" Kael asked. Active prisoners? Maybe 300. But there are thousands of those things, the forgotten ones, scattered through various dungeons. Every time someone hits 100% corruption, they get absorbed into the dungeon system as a new enemy. It's how this place maintains its difficulty curve. The implications of that were horrifying. Thousands of people had been through this place. Thousands had failed. Their only remaining purpose was to make things harder for new arrivals. Has anyone ever cleared all 999 dungeons? Kael asked. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. There are rumors, stories passed down from prisoners who've been here longer than me. They say that once, maybe 50 years ago, someone cleared all the dungeons and was released. But I've never met anyone who can confirm it. For all we know, it's just a myth to keep us going. 50 years. If time really did move differently in this place, that person could have spent centuries clearing dungeons. The scale of the challenge was almost incomprehensible. But Kael had never backed down from a challenge. And he certainly wasn't going to start now. I'm going to clear the second dungeon, he announced, standing up. Already? You just finished the first one. Most people rest for at least a few days between dungeons to recover mentally. I can't afford to rest, Kael replied. Every day I spend here is a day Seraphina gets to enjoy the power she stole from me. I'm not giving her any more time than absolutely necessary. Lyra studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. But be warned, the second dungeon is usually significantly harder than the first. The system adjusts based on your performance. Since you got an A rank on the tutorial, expect the difficulty to spike. Good, Kael said, and he meant it. I want it hard. I want it to push me to my absolute limits, because that's the only way I'm going to get strong enough fast enough. He walked toward the door that would lead to the second dungeon, his mind already racing ahead, planning strategies, thinking about how to optimize his limited skills, considering what kinds of rewards he needed to prioritize. Kael, Lyra called out, making him pause. Try not to die, okay? I've seen too many promising prisoners rush into dungeons overconfident and end up losing themselves. You're different. You might actually have a shot at making it through this. Don't throw that away. Kael looked back at her, seeing the concern in her eyes. She'd been alone here for 3 years, watching people arrive and either die repeatedly until they lost themselves or get killed permanently. Having someone to talk to, someone who showed promise, probably meant more to her than she was willing to admit. I won't die, Kael promised. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I've cleared every single one of these cursed dungeons and made my way back to the real world. He meant every word. Death wasn't an option. Failure wasn't an option. The only path forward was through 997 more nightmares, and Kael was ready to face every single one of them. The second dungeon taught Kael that he'd been right to fear the difficulty spike. He found himself in what appeared to be an abandoned city, massive skyscrapers stretching toward a blood-red sky. The streets were empty, littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of something massive moving between the buildings. This time, Kael had skills to work with. His enemy detection sense activated immediately, showing him a massive presence about 2 kilometers away. Whatever was hunting him was enormous, probably the size of a building based on the signature. He started moving, using his knowledge of urban environments to plan an escape route. The city was laid out logically enough, with clear streets and intact buildings offering potential shelter or hiding spots. His combat instinct, the passive skill from the first dungeon, was already feeding him information about optimal positioning and threat assessment. The ground shook. Whatever was hunting him had started moving, and it was coming fast. Kael ducked into a nearby building, a shopping mall that had been frozen in time mid-apocalypse. Mannequins stood in store windows displaying fashions that would never be worn. Food court tables were set with meals that would never be eaten. It was eerie, like walking through a photograph of the moment the world ended. His detection sense flared. The hunter was getting closer. Through the mall's glass ceiling, Kael caught his first glimpse of his pursuer. It was a giant, easily 30 meters tall, made entirely of what looked like living shadows. Where its body moved, reality seemed to warp and twist. Its face was a blank void except for hundreds of eyes that opened and closed randomly across its surface, each one scanning the environment independently. The giant's head swiveled, and dozens of those eyes locked onto the mall. Onto Kael. The creature's arm came down like a hammer, smashing through the glass ceiling and reaching for him. Kael ran, activating his instinct to guide him through the collapsing structure. Glass rained down around him. Metal beams twisted and fell. The entire building was coming apart. He made it out through a side exit just as the mall collapsed completely. The shadow giant pulled its arm free from the wreckage and began walking again, its eyes never leaving Kael's fleeing form. For the next 11 hours, Kael played the deadliest game of his life. The hunter was relentless, never tiring, never stopping. But it was also learning. Tactics that worked once didn't work twice. If Kael used a building for cover, the giant would demolish it completely the next time, anticipating that strategy. If he tried to lose it in narrow streets, the creature would learn to block his escape routes. It was forcing him to constantly evolve, to never rely on the same trick twice. And slowly, painfully, Kael began to understand. This wasn't just about survival. It was about growth. The dungeon was designed to make him adapt faster, think more creatively, push beyond his previous limitations. By the 10th hour, Kael wasn't just running anymore. He was analyzing the giant's movement patterns, identifying blind spots in its sensory coverage, exploiting the split-second delays between when it saw him and when it could react. By the 11th hour, he was leading the giant on a choreographed dance through the city, using its own size and power against it, causing it to destroy buildings that would fall in ways that blocked its path or created new escape routes. When the timer hit 0, Kael was standing on the edge of the city, the giant frozen mid-step behind him, prevented from taking that final lunge by the dungeon's completion trigger. Kael returned to the chamber with 3 new skills and a profound understanding. S-rank clears were possible, but they required perfect execution. One major mistake, one moment of panic, and the rating would drop. But the rewards were worth it. Shadow Step alone was a game changer, offering mobility that could compensate for his current lack of raw power. Lyra was waiting for him again, but this time she wasn't alone. 3 other prisoners were in the chamber, all watching Kael with varying expressions of interest, suspicion, and calculation. "Word travels fast," Lyra said. "S-rank clear on your second dungeon. People are curious about the new arrival." The largest of the 3 prisoners, a mountain of a man with scars covering every visible inch of skin, stepped forward. "Name's Darius. Been here 5 years, cleared 412 dungeons. You're either the luckiest fool I've ever seen, or you've got skills that could be useful." "Useful for what?" Kael asked, his guard immediately up. "For an alliance," said the second prisoner, a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to glow faintly. "I'm Cassandra. Some dungeons become significantly easier with a team. The prison allows cooperative clears starting at Dungeon 10. Darius, myself, and Kael here." She gestured to the 3rd prisoner, a lean man with quick eyes. "Have been running as a team for 2 years. "And you want me to join?" Kael concluded. "We want to evaluate you," Kael corrected, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. "S-rank clears are impressive, but we need to know if you can work with others. Solo mentality gets you killed in the team dungeons." Kael considered this. Alliance made sense strategically. Resources could be shared, knowledge pooled, difficult challenges overcome through cooperation. But Lyra's warning echoed in his mind. "Trust no one." "What's the catch?" he asked. Darius laughed, a booming sound that filled the chamber. "Smart. The catch is simple. Team dungeons offer better rewards but have shared risk. If one person dies, everyone's corruption level increases by 5%. It incentivizes keeping your team alive while also creating opportunities for sabotage. Why would you sabotage your own team? Because, Cassandra said softly, some dungeons offer special rewards for being the last survivor. Kill your teammates in a way the dungeon doesn't count as murder, and you get bonus skills or stat increases. It's happened before. It'll happen again. The brutal honesty was almost refreshing. At least they weren't pretending this was purely altruistic. I'll think about it, Kael said. But I'm going to clear a few more solo dungeons first. I need to understand my capabilities better before I commit to team dynamics. Fair enough, Darius said. But don't take too long. The offer won't last forever, and good team slots are competitive. After they left, Lyra pulled Kael aside. Be careful with them. Darius's team has a high turnover rate. They've had 7 members over 2 years. Only the 3 of them are still alive. What happened to the others? Officially, dungeon hazards, corruption overtake, bad luck. Lyra's expression made clear she didn't believe the official story. Unofficially, I think they sacrifice members when it becomes strategically advantageous. Kael filed that information away. Alliance might be necessary eventually, but not with people who viewed teammates as expendable resources. Over the next 2 weeks, subjective time, Kael cleared dungeons 3 through 15. Each one pushed him in different ways, forced him to develop new strategies, rewarded him with skills that slowly rebuilt his combat effectiveness. Dungeon 3 was a puzzle-based challenge in a constantly shifting maze. He earned spatial awareness and mental mapping skills. Dungeon 4 pitted him against waves of monsters, teaching him resource management and efficient killing. He gained precise strike and stamina optimization. Dungeon 5 was a stealth mission, where being detected meant instant death. He acquired silent movement and presence suppression. By Dungeon 15, Kael had filled all his available skill slots and was facing tough choices about which abilities to keep. He'd also reached E-Rank, gaining access to 1 additional slot and a modest boost to his physical capabilities. More importantly, he'd begun to notice patterns in how the dungeons operated. They weren't randomly generated. They were specifically designed based on psychological profiles. Every challenge targeted either a weakness he needed to overcome or a strength he needed to refine. The maze dungeon had targeted his reliance on straightforward combat by forcing him to solve problems through lateral thinking. The stealth dungeon had challenged his preference for direct confrontation by making aggression a losing strategy. The wave defense dungeon had tested his resource management, since he could no longer rely on overwhelming power to brute force through challenges. The prison wasn't just testing him, it was training him, molding him into something specific. But for what purpose? Kael was contemplating this question when Dungeon 16 threw him a curveball he never saw coming. He spawned in what appeared to be a replica of his old apartment from before the Great Rupture. Every detail was perfect, from the worn couch in the living room to the coffee stain on the kitchen counter. Even the photographs on the wall matched his memories. And sitting on that couch, looking exactly as he remembered her, was Seraphina. Kael's hand immediately went for a weapon he didn't have. Every muscle tensed. His heart rate spiked. This was impossible. Seraphina couldn't be here. This was a trick, an illusion, exactly the kind of mind game this place loved to play. Kael, Seraphina said, her voice filled with concern. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. You're not real, Kael said flatly. What? Kael, I'm right. Here, are you feeling all right? Did you hit your head during the dungeon raid? Dungeon raid? She was referring to the mission where she'd betrayed him. But in this illusion, that betrayal apparently hadn't happened. This was an alternate timeline, or a fantasy, or whatever twisted scenario the dungeon had constructed. This is Dungeon 16, Kael stated. You're a construct, a test. Seraphina's expression shifted from concern to confusion. Kael, you're scaring me. We finished the Siberian dungeon 3 days ago. You've been acting strange ever since, but now you're talking about being in a dungeon. Should I call a healer? The detail was impressive. She wasn't just using Seraphina's appearance. She was using her mannerisms, her speech patterns, the exact way she tilted her head when worried. If Kael hadn't known with absolute certainty that this was impossible, he might have believed it. Prove you're real, Kael demanded. How? What kind of proof would convince you? Good question. In a prison that could replicate dungeons, create monsters, and manipulate reality, what evidence could possibly distinguish truth from fiction? Kael tried a different approach. Tell me something only the real Seraphina would know. Something from before we met. The illusion smiled sadly. You know I don't like talking about my past. My family. My childhood. None of that matters. We agreed to focus on the future, remember? That was true. Or rather, the real Seraphina had said that. She'd always deflected questions about her life before becoming a hunter. Kael had assumed it was trauma, something painful she wasn't ready to share. Now he wondered if it had been strategic, a way to avoid creating lies she'd have to maintain. Why did you betray me? Kael asked, watching her face carefully. Betray you? Kael, I would never. Her expression shifted, showing hurt that looked genuine. Is that what this is about? Do you think I betrayed you somehow? What did I do? Either this was the most sophisticated illusion Kael had encountered, or something was wrong with the dungeon's premise. The objective was to determine what was real. But what if the test wasn't about identifying the illusion? What if it was about how he responded to it? Kael made a decision. He sat down across from the Seraphina construct, maintaining distance but no longer treating her as an immediate threat. Tell me about the dungeon, he said. The Siberian mission. What happened? She relaxed slightly, settling into the familiar pattern of post-mission debriefing. We entered the dungeon as planned. The first 3 levels went smoothly. But the 4th level... Kael, something felt wrong. The energy signature was different from what we'd detected initially. I tried to warn you, but you were focused on reaching the core. This was different from what had actually happened. In reality, Seraphina had been the one pushing them forward, eager to reach the core. She'd shown no hesitation, no concern. When we reached the core room, the construct continued. There was an entity there, not a monster, something else. It spoke to us, offered us a choice, power in exchange for sacrifice. Kael leaned forward. What kind of sacrifice? It wanted one of us to stay behind, to become part of the dungeon's structure. In exchange, the rest of the team would gain legendary abilities. Marcus volunteered immediately. You tried to stop him, but he said it was his choice to make. The entity accepted his sacrifice, and the rest of us were teleported out with new powers. A completely fabricated story. But why? What was the purpose of this elaborate fiction? And then what happened? Kael pressed. We returned to Seoul. The Hunter Association wanted to debrief us, understand what we'd found. But you've been distant since then, withdrawn. You keep looking at me like you don't trust me anymore. That's why I'm worried, Kael. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't understand why. The genuine emotion in her voice was masterfully done. If this was an illusion designed to manipulate him, it was working. Kael could feel the old feelings stirring. The connection he'd once had with Seraphina. The trust that had been so thoroughly destroyed. But he couldn't forget. Wouldn't forget. This wasn't real, no matter how much part of him wanted it to be. I'm going to ask you one more question, Kael said quietly, and I need you to answer honestly. If you could gain unlimited power by sacrificing someone you loved, would you do it? The construct's eyes widened. What? No, Kael. How could you even ask that? I would never... Liar. The word hung in the air between them. The construct's expression froze, then slowly shifted. The concern, the worry, the hurt, all of it melted away like ice under sunlight. What remained was something colder, more calculating. "How did you know?" Not Seraphina asked, her voice changing subtly. "Because I know the real Seraphina," Kael replied, and the real one would have paused before answering. She would have calculated the implications, considered the hypothetical from multiple angles. She wouldn't have given an immediate emotional response. That's not how her mind works. The construct studied him for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't Seraphina's smile anymore. It was something else wearing her face. Fascinating. You saw through the emotional manipulation by understanding the subject better than the illusion could replicate. Most prisoners fall for this dungeon because they want to believe. They want the fantasy to be real. But you chose truth over comfort. The apartment dissolved around them, replaced by an empty white void. The Seraphina construct remained, but now Kael could see through it. See the skeleton of code and magic that held it together. When Kael returned to the chamber, he found Lyra pacing anxiously. 7 hours, she said immediately. You were in there for 7 hours. That dungeon usually takes people days. Most prisoners get stuck in the loop, living out their fantasy until they die from starvation because they forget it's not real. How many times have you cleared it? Kael asked. Lyra looked away. 3 attempts, died twice. The third time I figured out the trick, but it took me 4 days and cost me some memories I wish I'd kept. What did you see? In your illusion? My daughter, Lyra said softly. She was 5 when I became a hunter. I missed so much of her childhood chasing power and glory. The illusion showed me what life could have been if I'd made different choices. It was hard to walk away from. Kael felt a pang of empathy. His own illusion had been painful in a different way, not showing him what he'd lost, but what he'd never actually had. The Seraphina in the dungeon had genuinely cared about him. The real one never had. I've been thinking about Darius's offer, Kael said, changing the subject. What do you know about the team dungeons? They start appearing at Dungeon 50, Lyra explained, seemingly grateful for the topic shift. You can still solo them, but they're designed for groups of 3 to 5. The rewards scale based on team performance, and there are special achievements for perfect synchronized clears. What's the catch? Besides the shared corruption risk, some team dungeons have PvP elements, scenarios where the optimal solution involves eliminating your teammates. The prison loves creating situations where cooperation and betrayal are both viable strategies. Of course it did. The whole place seemed designed to corrupt people, break down their humanity, turn them into the kind of monsters that would sacrifice allies for personal gain. I'm not joining Darius's team, Kael decided, but I might be interested in forming my own. Would you want to team up when I hit Dungeon 50? Lyra looked surprised. You'd trust me? We barely know each other. I don't trust anyone completely, Kael admitted, but you've been honest with me about how this place works. You warned me about the dangers instead of trying to exploit my ignorance. That counts for something. She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. All right. But I've got 273 dungeons under my belt, which means I'm way ahead of you. I'll still be running my own dungeons while you catch up. Fair enough. I'll find you when I reach 50. Over the next month, relative time, Kael pushed himself harder than ever before. He cleared dungeons 17 through 49, maintaining an average of S-Rank ratings through perfect execution and strategic skill selection. His power level climbed from E-Rank to C-Rank. His skill collection grew to include both offensive and defensive capabilities, mobility options, and utility functions that let him adapt to different scenarios. He also learned to be more efficient. Early dungeons he'd approached cautiously, taking time to scout and prepare. Now he moved with purpose, identifying optimal strategies within minutes and executing them flawlessly. What once took him days now took hours. but the dungeons were adapting too. Each one seemed to learn from his previous clears, creating counters to his favorite tactics. Dungeon 37 had specifically targeted his reliance on Shadow Step by creating an environment where teleportation triggered explosive traps. Dungeon 42 had featured enemies immune to physical damage, forcing him to develop magical attack capabilities he'd been neglecting. The prison was still training him, still shaping him, but toward what end? He got part of his answer when he cleared Dungeon 49,